perverse set of behaviours.
He Māori aho.
Your single source of truth.
The words don't pull it to me.
My husband is Samoan, so talofa. Ngā tikanga reo te Tiriti.
Te Kawerau of New Zealand's Parliament, Chloe Strawberry.
Penny houses.
And it's communist.
He whakatūpu.
They've got mother, running holidays.
Tēnā tātou, nau mai hara mai ki te kōrero o tēnei pō. Ko te kōrero o te pō nei, we're going to be talking all about Shane Jones' attacks against Te Kawerau Ā Maki, and Samar has a little news update for everybody as well. Samar, kia ora, how you feeling?
Kia ora. Feeling good. Good to be back here with you all tonight. How's everyone doing? How are you doing, Petty?
I'm doing very good, thank you, Samar. And yes, tēnā koutou, kia ora again to everyone who's joining us here tonight. We very much appreciate you being here. Feel free to leave us some helpful comments. We really appreciate it, and we'll be able to bring up people's comments on our end as well. We're not going to put any kōrero to Bob Jones. Mihi atu, ki te whānau pani, but he's a tangata that I have not looked into enough to yet make a comment about this fella, but have heard...
I hear terrible things.
I've heard terrible things as well, but ko te mea tuatahi he mate ne, so mihi atu ki te whānau pani. But also, mihi atu to everyone from Te Kawerau Ā Maki having to put up with this absolute nonsense from Shane Jones. Not only are we going to be talking about the attack, but we're going to be talking about this concept of co-governance. A little bit about where it's come from, but how that term is being framed and used. Our thoughts on that, because things have kind of been slipping, eh? And we're getting further and further away from tino rangatiratanga, and co-governance is this kind of response that's come out, the Crown responding to its obligations in terms of its apologies for breaches of Te Tiriti. But yeah, the principles were bad enough, and there are things like the principles, and co-governance has kind of been one of those things as well. But anyway, again, welcome everybody, and should we get started with the news headlines?
Aye, let's do it. Let's jump straight into it.
Ka pai, over to you, Summer.
Ka pai. So, first things first, I just wanted to bring up some semi-breaking news, which is that, so basically a freedom flotilla has been making its way to the Gaza Strip to try and bring some supplies because it's been completely blockaded for the last 60 days. No food or water or anything has entered into Gaza. And just a little side note, actually, Pere had an opportunity to go on this freedom flotilla, but didn't end up doing it. And now Israel has actually struck this flotilla. There are 30 humanitarians on board who now need us to amplify their voices, spread this message, to get surrounding countries to respond, because at the moment only Southern Cyprus has responded to their SOS call. And yeah, I mean, I often think to myself, what if we just sent a whole bunch of us to the border of Gaza? And what if we just went on ships? And isn't it just that easy? And it's like, Israel will just bomb you. So it's really not that easy. But, these brave humans knew that that was a possibility and went on a flotilla anyway. So they deserve our full respect and support. So share their whakaaro, go on Gaza Freedom Flotilla on Instagram. They're probably on all the other social pages, and just share their posts, try and get other countries to respond. And speaking of Israel, those of you who have been following the horrific things going on there, daily massacres continue. They're burning people alive in their tents. I read a couple of days ago that Israel kills a child in Gaza every 45 minutes. That's just children, by the way, and I don't think children are more precious than adults. I don't subscribe to that belief, but it is still more viscerally shocking when you're talking about children, and it just can't be helped, because everyone agrees on the innocence of children. And yet even then, we still can't get the world to move and do anything. But as this continues, as the Holocaust of our time rages on and the Gazan people are being exterminated by Israel, wildfires are spreading in Jerusalem. funnily enough.
Come.
And, you know, it's not a surprise. We know that when colonizers change the landscape of the land, and we're seeing it here with all this extreme weather events and all the flooding that's going on, it's because they've stripped the land of its natural ecosystems,
Shoulder.
changed it with roads, you know, taken out all the wetlands and things that are meant to protect us from flooding, replaced it with all these farms and roads and whatnot. And of course, there's nowhere for the water to go than just on top of these flat plains of lands that they've created. And similar things happening in Israel. You know, all the native trees were uprooted and replaced with these pines and roads, and they changed the habitat completely. And so now wildfires are more able to spread. So just a little bit of decolonial background to the wildfires. And just on top of that, Haaretz came out and said that actually it looks like this fire in Israel spread because of a fire that settlers started on Palestinian agricultural land.
Oh, okay.
So it's
Mismanagement.
looking like Israel is trying to burn Palestinian agricultural land, something that they've done for a long time.
Oh, that's naughty.
And this fire spread to Israel because, of course, it's the same land. They're colonizing Palestine. And now European countries are going to the aid of Israel to help them with their wildfires. Not the fires they're starting themselves, the Israelis on Palestinian land, not to help put out the fires in Gaza where people are burning alive and dying of starvation, and to bring them water, which hasn't entered in 60 days. No, they're taking water to Israel to help them deal with the fire that they themselves started in Palestine. So, I mean, we don't need confirmation at this stage that the Western world sees Palestinians as less than humans. But if you ever needed one, here it is. Israel can commit an all-out genocide and burn people alive and massacre them and start fires all day and night. And not one of these countries lifts a finger. But when Israel starts a fire in Palestine and it spreads to Israel, these countries go to help them put it out. So the protection of the Israeli colony as an extension of the Western Empire really cannot be understated by all of the Western countries nearby.
Yeah, it's a good way to just see like who falls on which side of the line, right?
It is, and this article does tell us
Oh no, name and shame.
Italy, Croatia, Spain, France, Ukraine, and Romania were sending planes to help battle the flames, while other countries, including North Macedonia and Cyprus, were sending water-dropping aircrafts. As Palestinians die of thirst and hunger, as they are being burnt alive themselves, not just trees. So that's all happening right now. And New Zealand, of course, completely silent on the genocide. And our news media continues to enable by either just completely erasing the genocide, or when they do put it on the news, it's from the Israeli perspective. Actually, One News did get called out for a lie recently. The Broadcasting Standards Authority actually upheld. We can bring it up. It actually upheld a complaint by the PSNA against their coverage of, I don't know if you guys remember, but recently there was this mob of Israeli football supporters in Israel, in Amsterdam, that were running amok on the streets, beating anyone they perceived as being Arab or pro-Palestinian. And people took videos of them beating up people. The evidence was all out there, but Western media, including One News, spun the story to make it look like pro-Palestinians were attacking Israelis because they were anti-Semitic. So they made this whole story up about it being an anti-Semitic attack, neglected to tell people that they were the mob going around attacking people, the Israeli football fans were. And PSNA complained about this. Most of the time I say complaints are a waste of time because we never seem to win them. But this time we actually did win. So here's another perspective for y'all that complaints are worth our time, because every now and then we'll get a win. And they just outright said it was wrong. It was wrong information. And that by the time they published it, they already had the information that it was those Israeli football fans that were causing the violence. They were warned about it by PSNA. They ignored them. They did another story peddling this lie about anti-Semitic attacks. And so the Broadcasting Authority called them out for both of those stories for being wrong. But unfortunately didn't ask for any further action to be taken beyond the shame of just being outed as liars. So there's not much teeth to this decision, but it's still a small little narrative win for us, e te whānau.
Yeah, if only we all had time to just constantly be putting through these complaints and OIAs, you know, like the Taxpayers Union or something like that. We really, I mean, is it a waste of time? It's not, if you have the time.
Yeah.
But for those of us who do have the time, there are probably more effective things that we can be doing. But I mean, it's like, it's one of those things that if you're at your computer often and you've got the time, but then you got to watch it all, right? It's a very time consuming thing. If only we had the time, I'm sure a lot more of these complaints would lead to the news having to fix things. I mean, there was that one with the bus incident with the Bebis children.
Yes.
Their lack of context as well, and just everything that they pushed through without then doing a follow-up story of something. Anyway.
Lots of stuff we could be, if we were more organized and just did mass complaints about every time they lied, maybe. But, and actually speaking of complaints, this is another space that people have said that we can enact some change by making some complaints. So the Human Rights Commissioner, you may have heard the story recently, he met with some Jewish organizations. And during those meetings, he expressed quite a few Islamophobic and other racist comments. Some of those comments he denied, including saying that Muslim immigration was a threat to Jewish communities and including a comment about the Afghani community themselves being a threat. Now, despite him denying these, the OIA that was done by, may have been One News, after just giving them shit.
After we've just shit on them.
But someone did an OIA, maybe One News, and they received the notes from that meeting. And it showed that indeed he did say, it's in the notes that someone took, that Muslim immigration was a threat to Jewish communities. He did say something about the Afghani community. So it turns out that he lied on both of those fronts. And, you know, it's just crazy that there's no limits for when we are willing to fire these people. Well, when this government, there are no lines. And, you know, this guy, it's not just the things he said since being Human Rights Commissioner, as horrific as this is, to say that Muslim communities are the threat to Jewish communities, when we know it's white supremacists.
Yeah.
His own research department says it's white supremacists that are the biggest threats to Jewish communities. And to put a target on Muslim communities when they are already a target both worldwide and we know in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with them facing the biggest terrorist attack in our history. So for him to put an extra target on Muslim communities is reprehensible. But he has been saying hateful things even before he took on this role, both towards our trans communities and towards our Palestinian and Muslim communities. Look at this article of just extreme rainbow washing that Stephen Rainbow did for the New Zealand Institute of Israel, the Israeli Institute of New Zealand, whatever. He wrote this horrific article justifying the genocide, well into the genocide. It was in January 2024 that he wrote this article. And in it, he says that wherever Palestinians have control is barbaric. This is in the context of an ongoing genocide. It's just classic white supremacist terminology to justify eradicating all of Palestinians because anywhere they have control is barbaric. So that's saying that everywhere where Palestinians live is just full of barbarism and, inferior
Savages,
humanity.
Classic colonial narrative. Ugh.
And just this whole article, I'm not going to read it because I don't want to ruin your night, frankly, but if you do want to, it's still up on the Israel Institute of New Zealand website by Stephen Rainbow, and he just hardcore does rainbow washing. Israel is one of the most gay-friendly countries in the world, but this appears to matter little to those who find the Israel-Palestine conflict fitting so neatly into a polarized good versus evil narrative. And he just goes on about how Israel is a safe haven for gay people. They often do this. They also do vegan washing. They say the Israeli army has vegan leather boots and all such things. And it's just like hilarious because, there are queer people in Palestine. And do you know what their what's happening to them right now. They're being bombed. They're being burnt alive. They're being starved like everyone else. It's just crazy to try and use this idea that Israel, which by the way does not support gay marriage, funnily enough, is a safe haven for gay people, and therefore it's okay for them to murder everyone in Palestine. It's just outrageous and hard to fathom.
But it's funny, right? Like all of these people have a political alignment, and the Human Rights Commissioner is meant to be one of those, you know, arbiters of justice, very down the middle, you know, just take things as fact and take things from there. But he's clearly got a bias, and you know, like we've covered this so many times. I think it's helpful for us to reiterate it. That Stephen Rainbow, Paul Goldsmith, who put him in as the commissioner, he had a committee that advised against the appointment of Stephen Rainbow. But then, from what we found out after a call with the Free Speech Union and a bit of backroom lobbying, it seemed that Stephen got the job.
Yes.
And we know that the Free Speech Union, like the Taxpayers Union, it's run by essentially the same people. It's another one of those right-wing astroturf groups who are not about the kaupapa as they say they are. They're not about free speech. They're about controlling free speech. And the Stephen Rainbow guy here,
Yeah, he's one of their guys.
he's one of their guys because the Free Speech Union helped him out on some cases previously. And what was it about designations?
So Stephen Rainbow said, don't worry, we're going to deal with censorship through a back door of designating certain groups as terrorists. So instead of censoring free speech outright.
Yeah, so instead of getting in the free speech way of like, oh, you can't say that, you know, because these people love being champions apparently of free speech, but instead of blocking people's speech, they're just going to throw a particular label on us.
Yes.
Like how prisoners, right?
Terrorist supporters.
Like
or
how
whatever.
prisoners have had their vote taken away from them. People who are in jail for more than 3 years, they're lesser than. Yeah?
It's for everyone now, this ban, even people
Oh,
who are under,
wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
Labour allowed prisoners who are in prison less than 3 years to vote.
But essentially, you know, it's just we're going to put them in that particular category, and then no
Yes.
matter what we do and say in terms of, you know, one person, one vote, and all of this nice stuff about equality and all of these values, once you designate them a particular way, then all of that is off the table. And so that's how they're getting around taking away those people's particular
Yes.
free speech. And it's
will
just-
be respected for everyone unless you fall into certain categories that they're going to create. So
Yeah.
they've already done a lot of this work because they've designated the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas as terrorist organizations. And putting two and two together, they're going to look for anyone who says support of anything that might remotely look like support to these groups and say that these people are supporting terrorism. That's what Stephen Rainbow was angling towards in terms of how he was going to suppress our rights to free speech, coming from the Free Speech Union, of course. And Free Speech Union outright said that they called Paul Goldsmith to put these guys' names forward, this guy and Melissa Derby. And both of them made it into the Human Rights Commission, which in Free Speech Union's words, they were surprised. They didn't expect the minister to just roll over so quickly for them, but he did.
And just reading people's comments, Chaz.
What is it?
Just Chaz saying that he used to be connected potentially to Stephen Rainbow on Facebook, but he blocked him because, of course, he said some bullshit stuff. Typical. And he's gay, right?
Yes.
Stephen Rainbow.
Hence
That's
the
his whole
rainbow washing genocide, rainbow washing his destruction of our free speech, and rainbow washing his anti-human rights agenda. He's going to say, no, I am pro-human rights because I'm gay. And that's the thing. Like, you can be gay and against human rights. You can be Māori and against human rights. You can be a female Iraqi person and be against human rights. It really does not matter.
Identity politics. Kapai, okay.
Kapai,
Let's go.
continuing with my quick fire news.
Quick fire.
The government has pretty much halved its operating budget. That means more cuts across our public services. That means more homeless people, more harm for our poorest communities. And what is News Talk ZB doing? Do their budget cuts go far enough? Heather Duplessis Allen asks. So you've got this dynamic going on where the right-wing government is being as right-wing as humanly possible, but you have the right-wing media pushing them to be even more right-wing, saying things like, you're not cutting the budget enough. You're not attacking race-based policies enough, which they did in this next story that we're going to do as well. Just constantly saying the government is not attacking poor people, Māori people, and prisoners enough. And this dynamic is what keeps us constantly shifting to the right. And we have a lack of that on the left, because often Labour rolls over, doesn't push for anything they think that isn't currently being talked about in these right-wing spaces, and keeps our centre moving further and further closer to the shifting right. And so we have the centre following the right, and the right is constantly shifting to the right, and the centre is constantly shifting behind it. And that's a problem we're finding ourselves in today, because how Heather du Plessis-Allen turned this into a story against the government for not cutting the budget more is outrageous. It's hilarious, and just goes to show the clear agenda that these groups like News Talk ZB have. But we can't dismiss them, because as far as I know, they're our most listened to radio station. So despite them being so extremely biased and such in the pockets of billionaires, people listen to them. And people think that they reflect reality.
Be good to know what the demographics are, though, eh? Like, out of our rangatahi and young people, who listens to News Talk ZB? Because when you think about the alternative radio shows that are popping up, Checkpoint, all of those other kinds of ones, they're all very, very right-wing, you know? There aren't really any left-wing alternative media groups that are popping up, you know, and we're doing a live stream, right? Because we feel that reaches our people better. Like what type of stuff, what kind of demographic does News Talk ZB reach? You know what I mean?
A big chunk of the population is driving to work and stuff.
It's true. They definitely do reach a lot of people, but I think the demographic is skewed, highly skewed.
Right.
And so the content that they have to produce to keep their people happy has to be quite far along on that spectrum. And just like what Heather du Plessis-Allen said about the Te Kawerau Ā Maki attack, you know, we'll talk about that when we get to it, but they have to take that position because that's where they are along the spectrum.
Yes. Yeah, speaking to their audience, but they've also fostered that audience. They've created this. It's I would argue that these are manufactured fears. I don't think people naturally gravitate towards thinking, oh, if only the government spent less money on public services, we'd all be better. I don't think they naturally think, oh, if only Māori weren't trying to enter into deeds of acknowledgement with the council, we would all have food on the table. It's definitely manufactured fears. So they do, it's like, it's the chicken and egg thing. But I do think that News Talk creates, and all the right-wing media creates this sort of audience that then keep watching them.
They're like, kia ora to Nick. So we're apparently in the same demographic as News Talk ZB. We've got Nick here. He says, I'm an average Kiwi. I listen. I like what I hear.
Oh, to News Talk or to us?
I'm guessing Nick, right? Nick listens to News Talk, and Nick thinks he's an average Kiwi. So we've got average Kiwis listening to News Talk and apparently Aotearoa Liberation League. That's pretty good.
I mean, I don't know if I can say this, but we have a family member who listens to the platform and loves our work. So
yeah, I mean, hey,
do with that what you want.
We're a diverse bunch here in Aotearoa, and I think people really are looking for debate and different opinions. And I think not that they have that spectrum of the difference on News Talk ZB, but you know, I've been on News Talk ZB a few times. You know, they do bring on people. Like sometimes they try to hammer them, and it might not be the fairest interview, but a lot of places like News Talk ZB, I think, make space for some of those debates, like the platform does. You know, we know a lot of people that we've been on the platform a few times. So, yeah, people want to hear different opinions.
Yes.
And maybe that's why a lot of people listen to News Talk as well, because they have different opinions than what you'd find on other platforms. So,
yes. And there's a lot to say about how we haven't, on the left, been able to create enough spaces for debates between different opinions and why we push them to those spaces. But that's a discussion for another time.
Killed up. Yep, killed up. But yeah, thanks to everyone who's listening. Really appreciate it. And make sure you hit the like button on the stream if you can, if you appreciate it. Killed up.
Ka pai. This week, we also saw an unprecedented strike action by doctors and nurses across Aotearoa Senior doctors, for the first time in our history, taking a 24-hour strike. Super meaningful. It could not be ignored. And so it was all over the news. I have to say, news coverage of it was mostly positive. It's hard when you've got senior doctors who fit the demographic of, you know, middle-aged, well-off white man and woman. It's difficult for the media to push back against that. And because these strikes had a lot of those people, of course, in Māori and Pacifica and all other demographics, it was really a united protest across all of our healthcare workers. And what they're mostly worried about, even more than their own well-being, is the loss of our healthcare workers to Australia and other countries because of the underpayment. So they're asking for the government to pay our doctors and healthcare professionals enough that they actually retain them in this country, because they can't do it anymore. They can't do it anymore. They're struggling. They're struggling to not have the right health professionals on hand, not being able to treat people, having to make difficult medical decisions that they're not empowered to do, having to do a workload that's above their physical ability, getting exhausted, knowing they're going to make mistakes, having to turn people down, breaking people's hearts by not being able to offer them care. The mental health of our healthcare workers is struggling, and that's why they're taking this extreme action. And as they said in all the interviews, you know, they don't want to be striking.
Of course not.
They don't want to be striking. And the
Last resort for this sector, definitely a last resort kind of thing. But they know that leaving it as the status quo is going to be even worse. So take my hat off to everyone who's been striking on behalf of this kaupapa.
Aye, and you know, the most disgusting thing about it all is that Simeon Brown and Health NZ, that's the government sector that looks after the negotiations with the unions, they came out basically blaming the doctors. They came out saying, we're very disappointed because of you, people's operations are going to be postponed. But everyone that the news interviewed, in terms of people who've had their operations postponed, said they supported the strike action because they understand the big picture here, that they've already faced cancellations even outside of the strike because doctors can't keep up, that people are already missing out as it stands, and that things are going to get much, much worse if they don't take a stand. So people support the strike, even people who have missed out. And the pathetic response from Simeon Brown and Health NZ for blaming the doctors. I mean, if you just think about it for a second, okay? Doctors, they're kind of being held hostage here because they have people's lives at stake. And the government is saying to them...
On both sides. Yeah, I mean...
And the government's saying to them, you better take whatever crumbs we give you and whatever little pay that we give you and whatever understaffing and horrible situation that you work under. Otherwise, if you strike, people will die. You know, they're saying to them, these people are on your hands. Every person who suffers from your strike is on your hands. Their blood will be on your hands. So they're holding them hostage.
But the reality is it's the other way around.
Of course.
Right? It's our politicians making these decisions. But, you know, like, so the doctors are seeing people suffering now, seeing people be turned away, seeing people run out of time waiting for their procedures and whatnot. And they're seeing people die already. And they're feeling the guilt for that already. You know, if you're one of these workers and you're working your ass off because you want to help human beings, you stretch yourself as much as you can.
Until you can't.
You can't. You know, you stretch yourself as much as you can, you push yourself, and you still feel awful when you can't do enough for somebody. And so then for Health NZ and for Simeon Brown to then put that additional pressure and say, shame on you for anything that happens to patients during that strike or because of that strike.
It's blackmail.
Yeah, it's very perverse.
Yeah.
Very perverse.
Yeah, so I fully support this. All our support and tautoko to these healthcare professionals who are striking. And they say that they are not ruling out further strikes. So keep an eye out. Now, another story that we've got, I don't know if we can read. Can we make this bigger?
Well, too much?
So, no, that was good. So, recently, the Students for Justice Palestine, Students for Justice in Palestine, Canterbury, Aotearoa mai. They found out that even though University of Canterbury told them they have no investments in armaments, that they do in fact have $100,000 invested in armaments, that's weapons, including in Israeli-linked security armaments. So
Armaments.
armaments. Anyway,
Armaments.
some of that money is invested in Israeli weapons or technology that upholds their apartheid genocidal states. So
Killed it.
they've admitted to this after previously saying they have no money invested in weapons or security. So the students found this out and they restarted their protest. Good on them. As part of that protest, they wanted to have a conversation with the vice chancellor?
Vice Chancellor.
And in this building, and they told them ahead of time, we're going to come to this building and try and talk to you. As they did that, and I'm going to press next to show you the video, the security guards heavily abused the students. They broke a student's arm. 2 students were concussed, strangled, and thrown to the ground, and the police was later called on them. So I'll just show you small clips of this. Look at that. Throw him on the ground. What the heck?
Up to, bro.
What's going on there?
He's too excited.
Yeah. Kapai, I don't know if this is restarted now, but
Kapai.
so
Things got heated.
things got heated, and unfortunately the University of Canterbury Student Association, I didn't bring this up ahead of time, but they released a statement basically throwing these protesters under the bus. They said that they supported the protest to a certain point, but not them entering a building that they are entitled to enter because it's their own university building. It'll be.
I was going to bring up one link, but it's Chris Lynch, so I'm not going to bring up his one.
Kapai.
But anyway.
It's an Instagram post that they made, the University of Canterbury Student Association. And basically they threw them under the bus. They said, we supported the protest, not entering that building, even though it's their own university building. They also said something about like, we personally haven't seen this evidence of 300,000 being invested in armaments. And they implied that Students for Justice in Palestine are lying. But actually, they only asked them for that evidence last minute. They haven't had time or ability to forward it to them. Secondly, I've personally seen that evidence with my own eyes because they sent it to us, because I was able to ask and wait for a response and actually view it with my own eyes. They're waiting to put it out through the media, so I'm not going to bring it up right now. It exists. I've seen it. It's proven the University of Canterbury does invest in armaments, including in Israel. And the University of Canterbury Student Association has unfortunately let their own students down with that statement. But hey, Anu.
Kia kaha, everyone. Jeez, it looked intense.
Oh, I don't know what that was. Oh, here you go. Kapai.
Oh, kapai. So this one's for me. Waipiro Bay. There is some fast tracking that's going on that we need to be aware of. So Waipiro Bay, as far as I know, is near Te Rawhiti, or as the locals there call it, Te Rawhiti. They got a bit of a I heard a kaumatua tell someone off once actually for not saying Rawhiti and said that, yeah, they said Te Rawhiti. Anyway, and so there is my understanding, a 250 berth marina. Well, I'm not really sure what a berth is, to be honest. I'm not up there with the Merino lingo. But I found out about this because Te Runanga a Iwi o Ngāpuhi posted about this. It's awesome seeing our iwi leaders speak out against fast-track processes. Find this group on Facebook, Stop Waipiro Bay Marina, if you want to be a part of it. Additional to that, they have a petition. Make sure you sign your name onto the petition. I'm going to put the petition into the chat right about now. if I can copy this whole big old URL right here, this big boy. Nope, apparently I'm not allowed to put a link that's that size in the comments, so all good. But look up Protect Waipiro Bay, sign that petition. Fast tracking is a really interesting thing because, you know, I know that the Ngāpuhi runanga have been involved in some fast track processes. It's interesting to see them speak out against this one. I'm glad that they haven't decided to just stay on one side there, you know. If you're gonna take from that pool, then at least have the guts to be able to call it out as well. So I take my hat off to the runanga for making a stand there. And additional, the Toitu Te Tiriti crew. Some people will remember during the hikoi, they said that they were going to do a claim to the Waitangi Tribunal in regards to the Regulatory Standards Bill. The Waitangi Tribunal has decided to hear this claim urgently. And so in 1 month's time, the Waitangi Tribunal is going to hear this claim. But there's still time for us to sign on. Okay, so Toitu Te Tiriti are asking as many people as possible to sign on. They already have about 12,000 people who have signed on. But yeah, just search up Toitu Te Tiriti and jump on if you can. Yeah.
Can I ask about that?
Mm.
What can we actually achieve with a Waitangi Tribunal review of this kind?
Well, they're the mandated government body to come up with a official position. They're the referees, the arbiters to make a decision on whether or not something breaches Te Tiriti. And that's why groups like Shane Jones, New Zealand First, and the ACT Party, and even National are trying to demonize the Waitangi Tribunal because it does have mana to make those kinds of calls, even though all of the recommendations that come out of the Waitangi Tribunal are non-binding, which is the weakest thing. But, you know, it gives gravitas to the point if it's coming from the Waitangi Tribunal.
So it's a bit of a narrative thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a procedural thing, it's a narrative thing, it's a ticking all of the boxes that we possibly can kind of thing to draw attention to this. I would say it's like a due diligence kind of thing as well. But it's like what we were saying before, right? If you've got time to put through complaints and do OIAs and all of these things, I do think that that is the important part of the mahi. Like in terms of this marina that's going up in Waipiro Bay, it does have weight if we can get signatures signed. You know, if we get X amount of signatures into a petition, then the government does have to do something about it. So, you know, all of these things, it might be a pain in the ass, but when you have an awesome group like Toitu Te Tiriti who's willing to do all of that groundwork for us, and all we need to do is sign on to the claim, then I think that's a really good way for us to amplify their organizing energy, which is something that all of us lack as individuals. You know, we're stronger if we're together. So, you know, that's probably the difference. You know, if we're just making complaints ourselves, it might be a bit hard to get some movement going like that.
Gotta collectivize.
But if we collectivize, then there's hope there.
Papa, I forgot to, I don't know where it's gone, but I was going to talk about the protests in Taranaki as well. They're also protesting a fast track project there that's going...
Not the Iron Sand one?
Yeah, the Iron Sand one.
Is there another one?
No, the Iron Sand one, they did a protest on it. I don't know where my link disappeared, but they did an awesome protest. They spelt out no fast track using their surfboards, and also they went into the water and formed a big circle around where their proposed mining site is meant to be. Shane Jones said that Debbie Ngāwera Paka was having a hissy fit.
Oh, right.
Classic gendered sexist language. Very typical for Shane Jones. Actually, what she was doing was extremely honourable, trying to protect the land from its destruction from colonisers and capitalists like Shane Jones. And I think that that is a good segue for our main topic today, because that's what we're talking about.
Kawerau, let's get into it.
Ka pai. Colonisers wanting to scapegoat what they're doing onto the very victims of their violence.
Okay, so main kaupapa of the night, now that we've got through the news, we're going to be talking about Te Kawerau Ā Maki, and I'll let you do our intro, Sama.
Ka pai. So Te Kawerau Ā Maki suffered greatly at the hands of Ngāpuhi and the Crown, with the Crown taking almost all of their land, including where their last marae and papakainga sat. Now, a deed to simply acknowledge their relationship is being called co-governance and even co-sovereignty by Shane Jones, showing just how extreme this government's pushback is when it comes to any acknowledgement of colonization and steps towards addressing it. Meanwhile, Shane Jones, who's busy greenlighting the destruction of our whenua, warns everyone to fear the indigenous people that are actually trying to protect it from the likes of him. Classic colonizer move, accuse your victims of what you yourself are doing. And hey, it's also a great distraction from the fact that this government is currently punching down at the poor, prisoners, workers, and other vulnerable communities in our country. But let's be real, these unhinged tantrums, pure panic. The colony sees the writing on the wall and it's not in their favour. Māori self-determination isn't some far-off dream, it's already here now. And it's only getting stronger. So Shane Jones can go cry all he likes, he can complain to his white supremacist mates at the platform, but the future is rolling in with or without him. And with that little introduction, I'll pass it back to you, Pere, who's the embodiment of everything Shane Jones hates. You are the mountain-worshipping pixie Māori that Shane Jones raves on about all day and night. So you tell us about the story from your perspective.
That is funny because, you know, sometimes we see some texts, and that was a great intro, by the way, well done. Sometimes we see some of the messages from Shane Jones and Winston Peters, and we're like, are they literally talking about us? Like, sometimes the criticisms, the critiques that they put out is like really on the nose.
They know us, fam. They're like, these vegan pixie hippies living in the bush, worshipping mountains. We're like, that's us.
Oh man, but you know, it's funny because like what you said, Māori sovereignty, I think it is just a matter of time. You know, it's a thing about New Zealand First and a lot of these people is they touch on a bit of the truth. You know, I do think that it's a true thing to say that Aotearoa is changing. It is changing. And they are fixating on their narrative that it's changing for the worse. And, you know, power is shifting. And all of the unsettled settlers, right, who haven't dealt with this trauma of colonization from the Pākehā side, they're now agitated. And for a lot of people, they're kind of like in their last days. You know, we're in the end stages of capitalism.
Yes.
We're in an age of progressivism. They like to call it wokeism, right? But as we learn about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as we come to terms with our colonial history, we will change. Our kids learning about our histories, and they'll be of the generation who are less traumatized and less holding on to that mamai. And so they're actually able to learn about it and learn from it. Whereas I would say a lot from the current generation are stubborn and unable to let go. And that's the demographic that votes for New Zealand First. So a lot of people, you would have seen this article that's been going around. Shane Jones and David Seymour, of course. We're not talking so much about the ACT Party because we just have a particular hate relationship with New Zealand First after what happened with Casey Costello. So Shane Jones rejects Waitākere Rangers co-governance plan. And so this is part of the game, right? This is part of the game to just call it co-governance, to simply do that, to get in the narrative that this is co-governance. And that's going to hook back into what happened with Three Waters. You know, everyone remembers them. There's still signs all over the country, right? Those annoying signs saying, stop Three Waters.
And the stop co-governance signs.
I don't know if the stop co-governance signs are still up. They are still here in Te Taituki. Every time we drive past it, you get pretty tempted, to just. I think that
do something
I feel
illegal,
like they've like set up security cameras just to try and snap me. They're like trying to tempt me to cut down the sign like Honeheke and the flagpole kind of buzz. Anyway, so their idea is to just keep trying to convince people that any type of engagement with Māori, any sitting at any tables with any Māori, to the point where they might be able to at all have any influence over anything, any amount, is now co-governance, because then they can hook back into that energy that was created during those stop three waters period. And an interesting thing about Shane Jones is not only is he calling it co-governance, but he's gone so far as to even trying to call it co-sovereignty. Where is it? There, co-sovereignty. And my issue with that is he's taking us so far from the reality. The Crown has breached Te Tiriti. The Waitangi Tribunal acknowledges those breaches, and then the Crown has some type of response to make amends. And co-governance is not tino rangatiratanga. You know, it's not the thing that is going to remedy the Crown's breaches of Te Tiriti or Waitangi. It's along the road, you know, it's one of those stepping stones. But it's nowhere near what Māori are entitled to through Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Simply what's within Article 2 of Te Tiriti, our tino rangatiratanga over our lands and all of our taonga. Tino rangatiratanga being that highest undisturbed level of authority. You know, and when you talk about that highest undisturbed level of authority, that's not co-governance, you know, a seat at the table of a predetermined kaupapa within a colonial house that you don't have any power or influence over at all. You know, co-governance, and maybe we go, always get so excited and like wanting to jump ahead. But, you know, how do we have co-governance when we don't yet have our own political sphere or governance on the other side? Like we have the colonizers' sphere of kāwanatanga. You know, if we think about this from the Mātike mai style of thinking about a kāwanatanga sphere and a rangatiratanga sphere, and then potentially in the middle is going to be a relational sphere. And that relational sphere in the middle is where co-governance can take place. But for that relational sphere to really have power and ability to do anything, the tino rangatiratanga sphere needs something. It needs to be empowered. It needs the kāwana sphere to stop oppressing, to stop restricting, to stop restraining. It needs to share with the rangatira sphere for the co-governance sphere to actually have any legitimacy. Because otherwise we're just running off of the goodwill of the Crown to engage meaningfully with that relational sphere, that co-governance sphere in the middle. But rather than it, because we're going to talk about Margaret Mutu's article later on, always jumping ahead. But just the fact that co-governance is merely a stepping stone to what the Crown should be offering Māori in terms of truly acknowledging Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Co-governance is just a stepping stone, and this thing that's happening with Te Kawerau Ā Maki is not even close to co-governance. And so then for him to take it even further and suggest that it is along the lines similar to co-sovereignty is just taking the piss, to be quite honest. So if we look at the deed, so, you know, the whole issue here is around Te Kawerau Ā Maki signing or having completed this deed of acknowledgement with Auckland Council. Deed of acknowledgement. And this is happening because I think it was about 16 years ago, the Waitākere Ranges Heritage Act was put through local government. And in this Heritage Act, it acknowledges Te Kawerau Ā Maki as mana whenua of the area. Deed of acknowledgement. And so this was in 2008. And in this Heritage Act, it stipulates that they will create a deed of acknowledgement. Okay, it stipulates that the deed of acknowledgement is still yet to be created, but they're promising to do so.
Yes, and the purpose of this deed of acknowledgement is stated in number 30, section 31 over there.
Here we go.
The purpose is to identify opportunities for contribution by tangata whenua to the management of the land. So keep that in your mind. This is what legally Auckland Council is required to do, to identify opportunities for contribution by tangata whenua, that's Te Kawerau Ā Maki, to the management of the land owned by the council, only for land that is owned by the council.
Simple, seems straightforward, seems all good. It's crazy. It's been such a long time for this very small thing, this deed of acknowledgement to take place. It's been so long. And we don't have the original interview that we wanted to bring up here of Heather du Plessis-Allen speaking to Nicola Willis.
It was removed.
We think it's been removed. If people can find the interview with Heather du Plessis-Allen and Nicola Willis talking about the Waitākere Rangers
Earlier than this interview on the 28th of April, we would be interested in having it on record, because the way that Heather du Plessis-Allen talked about it, she was very aggressive. She was literally like how your friend talks before they're about to knock someone out. Like they like getting your opinion, like, should I do this? Should I do this? Because what she said to Nicola, she was all like, are you good? Are you good with this? Is this good with you, Nicola? What do you say about this, Nicola?
Are you good with this? And I just thought it was like, wow, like, so, you know, News Talk ZB, they're obviously playing it up. Let's just listen to a little bit of this interview.
Join New Zealand's most reliable mobile network.
Not the News Talk
from
ZB
$39.
ads. Okay, here
With
we go.
us is
Sorry.
Nicola Willis, the Finance Minister. Hi, Nicola.
Hi, Heather.
Now, what have you found out about the Waitākere co-governance situation?
You know, so right there, she's saying, what do you know about the co-governance situation, right? If Heather had looked into this herself at all, she would understand it's not co-governance, but because that's her narrative and that's what she wants to say and what she wants to build it up as, she opens the story by calling it co-governance.
And just to add that, because this is a follow-up interview from the other interview that we cannot find, where it was an interesting interview, because after she was super aggressive with Nicola said, I only found out about this half an hour ago. And then Heather du Plessis-Allen said to Nicola, oh, in that case, I feel bad about hammering you so hard when you didn't know about it. So I feel like because she felt bad about it, they removed that interview and redid it, where she was softer with her.
Possibly. Let us know if you find that interview, Hoama.
I found out that this is very much an Auckland Council-led issue. DOC is only party to the discussions at all because it administers less than 1% of the Waitākere Rangers. So Auckland Council is leading this consultation. Our position as the National Party is clear, and as the government, we don't support co-governance of public services, and we would have significant concerns with any proposal that saw public access.
So also just there, you know, even though this is not co-governance, and Nicola Willis had time to go away and find that out for herself, she's meant to be coming here and providing clarity. Yeah. She's meant to be coming here. She is the government. She is meant to be coming in and saying, no, this is what the position is. But instead, because, hey, we're talking about co-governance, because that's how you've opened it, Nicola Willis is reiterating her party position on what co-governance is. So there's like no need at all to talk about it, to go there at all. But hey, let's talk about this as if it's co-governance, is what I'm hearing from Nicola Willis.
Yeah, and she can get away with it because she can be like, oh, I didn't say this was co-governance. All I was saying is that we're against co-governance. But of course, in the context, it implies that they're talking about a co-governance arrangement in this case.
Yeah, it's building up the narrative for sure.
Access to public land restricted without a very good reason, which would be something like closing the tracks for safety.
Okay, do you think this is co-governance?
Well, I've seen a range of views on that from councillors, most of whom are saying, no, it's not co-governance, ownership and decision-making stays with the local boards and the council. But I think you need to get Auckland Council on your show to ask them that question.
So even there, massive fear-mongering, because she's leaving it up to, yes, exactly. She's leaving it up to debate. Well, most councillors are saying it's not co-governance. I don't know. Go talk about it with them. She's leaving it up to debate, but we know for a matter of fact that it's not an example of co-governance. And everything she said just there, she said most councillors say no decision powers are passed on to them. They have no right over, you know, change of property, blah, 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 blah. Those things are facts. But she's framing them as an opinion. And it's just like, you know, goes to show how we're stuck in this post-truth world where it's just she said, he said, instead of just, these are the facts, this is reality. And it's just impossible on these channels that
they'd rather have time to push their narrative than actually inform the public about what's going on. It's crazy. So they're all about just steering everyone towards a particular thing rather than actually informing them about anything.
Waitākere.
Where
we
is Wayne
did.
Brown in all of this?
Okay, that's a very good point. We'll talk to the mayor. We spoke to Richard Hills, who is the councillor leading this. He says it's not co-governance, but they can at Auckland Council delegate the decision-making to this committee, which then makes it co-governance, doesn't it?
We'll listen to what Nicola says here.
Well,
but
are they intending to do that? Because I
Yeah.
don't understand that that's what they've consulted on.
yeah, she's just like, okay, that's a bit weird and crazy. So she didn't want to carry on with the fear-mongering energy there. But I mean, as far as I know, councils can delegate anything to any group. It seems like a
Exactly.
ridiculous thing. Heather Duplessis-Allen has come in and said, oh, okay, sure. Sure, they don't have the typical powers that you would expect of a co-governance committee. Okay. But you could give them those powers and then it would be, right?
Which is just outrageous. They can just choose to give power to any old body that they create. I mean, the hyper-focus on Māori issues, it can't be understated just how obviously clear that they have an agenda. Like, one of my recent hobbies has been commenting on some of the racist pages on Facebook, like the New Nation Party. And just all day, every day, all they're doing is just dissecting any government initiatives that go towards Māori. Anything. Could be $1,000, could be a few $1 million. All day, every day, that's just what they're posting. Look at this government initiative for Māori. Look at this agreement for Māori. And I'm just always commenting, being like, okay, that's about 1/100th of the 12 billion that they've agreed to put towards military spending. Or less, 1/1000th or something. Just a tiny, tiny percentage when you compare it to 12 billion. In fact, and I want to repeat this in like every single episode that we ever have, but total treaty settlements in Aotearoa come up to under $4 billion.
Total is like 2.7.
I found something that said it was 3.5. So let's just be generous.
Okay,
As generous as possible. We know for sure that it's under 4 billion, somewhere between 2 and $4 billion. The total treaty settlements of all time. Okay, let's just say it's 4 billion. Okay, let's just be charitable. In 1 year, just this year alone, $12 billion towards military spending, towards American death machines. In 1 year, they gave more to the military than in the entire time that they've been giving money to iwi Māori that they've stolen everything from, that they've destroyed that they've committed genocide towards. And all of these groups, Hobson's Pledge, New Nation Party, so many racist groups exist. They just complain about that 4 billion all day and night. Oh, this settlement gravy train. How come we never hear about the military gravy train? How come we never hear about the landlord gravy train? I think last year they gave landlords the same amount in 1 year alone in tax cuts as they have in the total amount of treaty settlements. They gave them about $3 billion. So 1 year, just like that, sign an order, boom, $3 billion to landlords. No one's argued about it. News Talk ZB said nothing. But in all these years they've been giving settlements, it's less than that. And yet there's enough for an entire right-wing industry to exist just to challenge those 3.5 billion or whatever it is. So,
and I'll just, just to say, yeah, we can take a conservative figure, but this is from the Auditor General. The Auditor General just did this huge report, and I was going to bring it up.
Oh, is this recent?
Later. I will bring it up later. Let's not jump ahead. But they have said 2.7 billion of financial and commercial redress has been transferred through settlements. Only 2.7 billion. It's like a drop in the bucket in comparison to everything else we've been talking about. But, there'll be different numbers out there, but this is the Auditor General. So I think that this is a really good figure for us to go off of. But anyway, are you good? You stunned?
I was reading some comments. I got
kapai.
distracted. Okay, where were we?
So we were just talking about, we got sidetracked. Oh, we were on the Nicola Willis. Where are you, Nicola?
That way.
I'm just gonna
That
keep
way.
clicking
That way.
wildly.
There.
Oh, all of these things can load. That's great.
ZB.
Here we go. Aroha. Back to the interview, because we love listening to Nicola.
And my view would be that they should be listening to the feedback they get from ratepayers.
It sounds to me like you're telling them to tai hoa here.
To tai hoa. At least you didn't say tai ho, as some people often say when they try to use tai hoa. That's not what Nicola is saying. She's just like, oh, can you just nudge it a little bit? Can you just be a little bit stronger, Nicola? Come on, just a little bit stronger.
Well, the act, the law is clear. It is a local act, so it requires the Auckland Council to make sure it's got good engagement and consultation with iwi. But then how they administer that is a matter for the council, and I think they should be very clear with their ratepayers about what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Okay, so would you be happy if what happens because the iwi wants it is that there is restriction, about 35% of the park is restricted to public access and something like 13 to 14% of the tracks are shut down?
Well, look, as I said, I'd be...
Where is this from?
I know where it's from.
Oh.
It is from somewhere. She's not just throwing it out. So she said, how would you feel about the shutting down of X amount of the, what did she say?
Doing and why they're doing it.
Okay, so would you be happy if what happens because the iwi wants it is that there is restriction, about 35% of the park is restricted to public access and something like 13 to 14% of the tracks are shut down?
She is talking about, because Te Kawerau Ā Maki put forward a proposal to the council. Pretty much their take, their whakaaro on how they would like to see things.
Kapai.
And now Heather Duplessis Allen has pulled it out as if it's what's happening, you know, but like these are just recommendations. There is just some consultation that has taken place. The iwi has given their side of the scenario in terms of what they would like to see. And now Heather Duplessis Allen is almost posing it as if it's what is going to happen. She did say that this is what the iwi wants, but she's, you know, at the end of the day, without the context, and at the end of the day, because it's not co-governance, they don't have an actual say in that actually happening. It's the decision-making process is completely down to Auckland Council. But because she hasn't given that context and is trying to get people to perceive it as co-governance, there will be people who are thinking, oh shit, is that what's going to happen? Oh shit, that's not good. That's not good. Better hate on Auckland Council. Better hate on co-governance.
Nicola Willis is saying, like, unless there's a really good reason. And I'm sure that in their proposal, the iwi explained why they would be doing these things. There would be very good reasons for doing it. So Heather Duplessis Allen is leaving out what the reasoning is to closing some of these tracks down. It's just these iwi are just closing these tracks down because they hate Pākehā and they want to make you guys suffer. That's the narrative they're pushing forward. But if she just explained their reasoning, whether it's to stop Cody dieback or whether it's to protect these tracks for future generations, you'll see the logic is about like still protecting that piece of environment for everyone, including Pākehā. But they leave the context out. They just tell you they just want to shut these down. They want to take these from you. Are we still listening to this?
Yeah, hey,
darn interview?
There's a couple more minutes left.
Well, look, as I said, I'd be pretty concerned with any proposal that saw public access to public land restricted without a very good reason. And I think that I would not be alone in having that view, and I'd suggest that many ratepayers would have that view. So it is for the Auckland Council to explain.
Okay, if you didn't like what you saw, you could pass a law and stop it, would you?
There is some complexity there because the Heritage Area Act under which the council is acting is a local act. So any change to the legislation actually has to come from Auckland Council.
So actually, it's got nothing to do with me.
So that means that in this...
So central government legislation can only be changed by the local government body it affects.
Where it's a local act, and Auckland Council are the administering agency for that act. So if we were to change the specific legislation, that would have to come from Auckland Council. Let me be clear: there's no requirement in the legislation for co-governance. There's no requirement in the legislation for a committee of the sort that the council is proposing. This is very much an initiative from Auckland Council that's not required by law. So as I say, it's up to Auckland Council to answer why they're going about it in this manner.
Okay.
Okay, so just on that point, you can see that in the original act, in terms of the deed of acknowledgement, can you...
This is the Heritage Act?
Yeah.
Oh, my bad.
Here it is. So, in the section about the deed of acknowledgement, it specifically says the purpose of this is to identify opportunities for contribution by tangata whenua to the management of the land. Okay.
The only purpose.
That's the only purpose.
It says the
Nicola
only
Willis
purpose.
says that this act doesn't say they have to make a board of 50-50 people. This is true. The act doesn't say you must set up a board, but what it does say is that you need to identify opportunities for contribution by tangata whenua,
By tangata whenua.
which is Te Kawerau Ā Maki. And it's just logical. You just have to think rationally and realize that the only way to achieve that is to set up some type of board where you're in a relationship, where you're having conversations with tangata whenua. That's the only way to identify opportunities with them. So for her to say, oh, the act didn't require them to do that specific thing is such a slippery little thing to say, because obviously the act doesn't specify every single thing they must do.
It's so bad. It reminds me of when people are like, it doesn't say partnership in Te Tiriti or Waitangi.
Exactly.
It doesn't say agreement. It doesn't, it's like read between the lines. It's ridiculous. And so
They're relying on people's inability to do that, though. Inability to read the law. Like, most people won't find this act. Most people won't find this section. Most people don't know that the council is actually just abiding by what the law is telling them to abide by.
All right, what have we got left of this
there more?
interview? We do, just a little bit.
Yeah, and so what do you think Wayne Brown has got his fingers in this one?
His fingers.
I don't know whether he does at all, but I just think that to understand why they're doing it, what it means, what the
you better
implications
hassle
are,
him.
he's the better person to be talking to than me.
Fair point.
Because as you learnt last week, the first time it came across my desk was half an hour before
Last
your
week.
show.
Well, we'll take your advice and we might
Okay,
get him on.
that's some-
Now, on this business,
That's a clue.
That's a hint as
That's
to
a
when
clue.
this deleted interview might have been.
We may have just missed it. Maybe it's not a big
I tried
conspiracy.
so hard to find it, y'all.
We've only been looking for it today, and we've had lots of other things that we've been doing today. So the interview might be out there. It's not that important, but I just think Heather, she's very attack dog energy. And so, she's trying to put that energy onto her listeners. People who trust Heather Duplessis-Allen, they will hear her reacting in that way. And so they know that they then need to get fired up as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Kapai, moving on.
Is that done?
Yes, that's done. So let's take things back a little bit.
Why are they even entering into any sort of deed of acknowledgement with Te Kawerau Ā Maki?
Who, Auckland?
The council, yeah.
Mm,
That's
okay.
what we're tracing back now.
We'll take it back even further, e Huama. So one of the reasons why I feel really sorry for Te Kawerau Ā Maki, and if there's anyone here from Te Kawerau Ā Maki, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou. One of the reasons is that I am a uri of Ngāpuhi Nui Tonu. And when I was reading this particular little blurb here about the musket wars, they give a special shout out to Te Kawerau Ā Maki, talking about how, it says several of their pā along the west coast fell in quick succession after Ngāpuhi started making their way down with their muskets. So Kawerau Ā Maki, they have suffered greatly, as history has recorded in regards to the musket wars. And so then this little blurb, if you want to read it, it's on Te Ara. It talks about land loss, and it talks about land loss for all iwi who are around the Tamaki Makaurau area. But it gives another particular shout out to Te Kawerau Ā Maki. It says the lands of Te Kawerau Ā Maki, Ngā Tai and Ngāti Pawa and the Waitākere and Hunua ranges were used for supplying Auckland's water and eventually became regional parks.
And that's where we got married.
Oh yeah. At Hunua Falls was where we got married, doesn't it? Oh, so they might have been the mana whenua of our
They probably
wedding
were.
site. Oh.
And just so everyone knows, I consider the Waitākere Ranges to be my home. That's where I first migrated to when I arrived in Aotearoa. That's where I grew up as a child. And that forest, the Waitākere Ranges, Piha and Bethel's Beach, were instrumental in my development as a person. Like my spiritual development with nature, I can point back to me going to Bethel's and Piha and the way that that land spoke to me during that time. It's changed me. It changed me completely. So I have a very strong relationship with that
You
land.
have Te Kawerau Ā Maki to thank for that?
Absolutely, who have done everything in their power to protect that land for future generations. So this story is extremely personal to me, and it's so sad to learn. And, you know, honestly, I'm a little bit of ashamed to admit it. But after all of these years of me enjoying Piha and Bethel's and the Waitākere Ranges, I had no idea what Te Kawerau Ā Maki had been through. I had no idea that I was enjoying my time playing and celebrating at Bethel's Beach, where their last marae was gone, was lost because they wanted to build dams for Waitākere. I had no idea that their papa kainga were destroyed so that I could go and enjoy this now regional park. So for me, it's been this, you know, it's been a really enlightening moment to learn about places that I visited all throughout my childhood and teenage years, to find out about this really dark history that, you know, I'm sure any land that you looked at in Aotearoa, you'd find the same. You'd find the really dark colonial history. And I urge us all to do that. I urge us all to do that. If there's a place that you really love, that you're visiting often, what's the history of that land? What did Māori go through? Was there a marae? Was there an urupa? Because that's another thing that Te Kawerau Ā Maki lost. They lost urupa, cemetery. So colonization really, it didn't have any respect for any special places that Te Kawerau Ā Maki had, whether it was their final marae or whether it was their cemetery. Everything was lost. Everything was taken.
Yeah, I mean, we're just not encouraged, eh? I'm not surprised. You know, the amount of, we love going places and like looking at all the plaques that people put everywhere, and we're like, oh, what do they have to say about this place? And so, you know, we're really just not encouraged to learn about colonization. And that's the whole kaupapa, of these colonizers like Shane Jones and everyone else from New Zealand First and the ACT Party and National Party and Labour. They don't want to add that context of the colonization because it's just such a traumatic, painful thing to talk about. But it's not that it's painful to talk about. It's that it highlights the injustice and it highlights their lack of mahi to justify or to make right those injustices. If you don't talk about it, the problem can go away.
Exactly.
But we're stuck now in this realm of always reminding them, and we will perpetually be reminding them indefinitely until the end of time, because just look at how beautiful Māori culture is here in Aotearoa. The uniqueness, the beauty of Aotearoa, a lot of it we have to thank Te Ao Māori for that. And the way that we've been encouraged to be able to practice our culture, thanks to the mahi of our tupuna, many people who have now passed on, people who are responsible for us having things like kura kaupapa, te wiki o te reo Māori, all of these various things. It's unstoppable at this point. It is unstoppable. Yeah. And so we will be in this never-ending cycle of reminding the Crown of its obligations, because we're not going anywhere. You know, the means to attempt to assimilate us, to destroy us, and so that we forget our justice claims and forget
They've failed.
They've failed astronomically. And it's like, you know, like we've talked about this before, like, you know, allowing the All Blacks to do the haka, you know, and allowing te reo Māori version of the national anthem, and like, you know, putting our motifs, our designs on things like the Air New Zealand planes and these things, you know, where they've tried to extract from our culture the exoticness and beauty of our culture to benefit the appearance of the colonial state so that it looks more exotic and more indigenous than it is. Those things have become part of Aotearoa, have become part of what I would call, you know, the Pākehā identity, the Kiwi identity. And that's the like half truth.
So it's backfired on colonizers in a way.
That's the half truth that these colonizers hate. We are having an influence. We are having an influence. And I believe there have been positive influences. And just like how kura kaupapa students there are achieving better than their comparable students in public schools.
Even Pākehā, they're even doing better than Pākehā students in public schools. That's the incredible part about it.
And, you know, look at Māori wards, you look at the history curriculum that was being rolled out in schools. The report said that teachers were enjoying teaching that curriculum, and
Really?
and Māori and Pacifica students were getting a better education because of that. So, like, you know, we're improving our schools, we're improving our culture in general because of aspects of Te Ao Māori coming into the landscape here in Aotearoa, and it's for the benefit of everybody. But, you know, those who like the power dynamics of the status quo, people who have benefited from stolen whenua Māori over generations, they don't want to be looking back on everything, looking back at their parents and their tupuna and the whenua that they're standing on, and to accept that their benefits come from our blood, our tears, our suffering, our dispossession. Because to actually face that is an incredibly traumatic thing. And I take my hat off to Pākehā who come to terms with that kind of shit. It's some heavy shit. Heavy stuff. But to the identity of us as Kiwis, Pākehā, Māori, tangata whenua, whatever you identify as, learning about our history and accepting these dark parts about our history is such an important thing for moving forward. That's why I'm fine to bring up the musket wars and what happened in the musket wars and the devastation that Ngāpuhi caused through the musket wars. I feel an obligation to speak up for Te Kawerau Ā Maki because of our contribution to the state of suffering that they find themselves in today, the state of landlessness that they find themselves in today. You know, the good thing about Ngāpuhi, though, is when we went down and caused these massacres, Ngāpuhi never stayed to inhabit those lands.
They were not settler colonialists?
Exactly. That's the difference between, right? That's what it means to be a settler colonial kind of kaupapa, yeah? Is for you to actually settle and take over. Yes, we massacred. But then after that, the mana whenua, the local people of those areas, after they had fled, they were able to return to those spaces. And they were able to retain their mana whenua, their indigenous identity to those places. And that's a bit of a difference between Ngāpuhi and how other people have come in and, yes, dispossessed us, killed us, massacred us, and then stolen, taken our whenua, and then tried to erase our identities.
And it has to be said as well that the musket wars occurred within the context of colonization, right? Within the context of colonizers bringing muskets to Aotearoa, of pressuring people for land, of pressuring people for resources, and creating all these intertribal wars. Not to make excuses for Ngāpuhi, but I do feel like colonization as a context here, it does need to be mentioned.
It's in the context of the changing world, right? I mean, there were pressures, and there are always pressures, and the world is always changing. We didn't need to go and do all of those massacres.
He's like, no excuses now.
But yeah,
I just feel like it's you have to mention that colonization was happening at this time, and things were not natural. This was not a natural intertribal war. Muskets were involved, which was never involved in any other intertribal war.
Yeah, man. So. Anyway, so I feel a bit of an obligation to speak up for Te Kawerau Ā Maki. And not only that, but Shane Jones, he has whakapapa to Ngāpuhi. He knows exactly the history of the musket wars. He knows exactly what Te Kawerau Ā Maki has gone. He knows that they are the only iwi in Aotearoa who don't have a marae.
Wow.
He knows all of this. And so for him to be punching down like this to the smallest, maybe one of the smallest, if not the smallest iwi in Aotearoa. And, you know, what just happened with Taranaki Maunga. And I'm jumping ahead. Instead of jumping ahead, let's just go through it. So, Te Kawerau Ā Maki have suffered greatly from Ngāpuhi. Oh, yeah. What have I missed? What have I missed?
Landlocked,
we'll go over it in the next one. And so that's one aspect of why I feel sorry for Te Kawerau Ā Maki. And I'm just going to read out this little blurb that they've got here on this Give a Little page.
To rebuild the marae, because they are the last iwi in Auckland without a marae. They want to rebuild their marae. And so they're actually fundraising. Million. Wow.
15 million is what they're after.
Yes, everyone donate if you can, because this Give a Little website is still up.
Okay, so I'm just going to read out the blurb that they've put on their Give a Little, because it gives us a lot of good insights about Te Kawerau Ā Maki, instead of us having to be historians. So, Te Hinga Kāinga Whakahirahira, Marae and Papakainga project is about bringing our people home and safeguarding our culture. Over 90% of our tribal lands were taken within 15 years of the signing of the treaty. Over 90% of our tribal lands were taken within 15 years of the signing of the treaty. That's outrageous.
Outrageous.
And our last dedicated marae was lost when the Waitākere Dam was built in the early 1900s. So they lost their last marae so that the Waitākere Dam could be built. That is incredible. Yeah, what did you have to say?
Just that in the previous article, it
Kabai,
said
okay.
that the Hunua Ranges was used for supplying Auckland's water and eventually became water parks. So, regional parks, sorry. So what we're talking about here, Te Kawerau Ā Maki's land was taken to supply water for all of Auckland's region. And I just feel like that's a really important point, because it wasn't just that the Crown was being horrible and stealing land from Māori, but it was also that Māori land was used to build the colony as we know it today, which simply would not exist if it wasn't for that land theft and alienation. So it's the colonization of Te Kawerau Ā Maki and all the iwi across Aotearoa was instrumental in building the colony and all of its infrastructure that we see today. It simply could not exist without that land theft.
Absolutely. All right, so the Waitākere, they lost their marae in the early 1900s. We are the only iwi in the Auckland region without a dedicated marae for our people. That's incredibly sad. Marae are the civic, social, and cultural centre for iwi. Yep, kapai. So they've lost their only marae. They're having to do a give a little page and fundraise.
That part is ridiculous, by the way.
The no marae?
No, well, yes.
That they're having to fundraise?
They have to fundraise to build their own marae, to buy back their own land after the Crown stole it and destroyed everything that they have.
Yeah, it speaks to how, like what Margaret Mutu put together, a report looking at the overall redress on average that people receive from treaty settlements is on average less than 1% of the actual value of what they've lost. And so, this is an example. They are a post-treaty, that's the right word, right? Post-treaty settlement iwi. Te Kawerau Ā Maki have received a settlement from the Crown.
Yeah, and everything that we talked about has been acknowledged in the settlement. Like the Crown actually gave Te Kawerau Ā Maki an apology. And in the apology, they explicitly state that we deeply regret these breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. They say that they
profoundly regret, yeah, of course, but
they profoundly regret these breaches. They say they recognize the grievances of Te Kawerau Ā Maki, and they realize that the Crown failed to appropriately respond to claims of justice. They say that they profoundly regret the breaches of Te Tiriti, which resulted in the alienation of much of Te Kawerau Ā Maki's land by 1856. The Crown is deeply sorry for its subsequent failure to protect these lands that were reserved for Te Kawerau Ā Maki. Because at that stage, not only were they stealing all their land, they promised they'd make some reserves for them. Even that they didn't live up to. And the loss of the entirety of these reserve lands and of other traditional lands had devastating consequences for the spiritual, cultural, social, economic, and physical well-being of Te Kawerau Ā Maki. These consequences continue to be felt today. So this is the government in 2014, when they were discussing this. 2015 it got passed, admitting that the consequences of the Crown's actions continue to be felt by Te Kawerau Ā Maki today. And so during this time, in 2014, funnily enough, New Zealand First was part of the government. So here they are discussing Te Kawerau Ā Maki Claims Settlement Bill in the first reading, right? 4th of November 2004. And we look at Peter Paraone, who was a New Zealand First member, what do you call them, politician at that stage. And he writes this heartfelt speech about why Te Kawerau Ā Maki deserves this settlement. And he says, specifically, the language that New Zealand First uses at this time, I think is extremely relevant. And I think it just highlights their flip-flopping, their lack of integrity.
It also highlights like the roots of New Zealand First. You know, like a lot of people won't know, but when New Zealand First came through, they got into government. Most of their seats came from the Māori electorate seats.
Right.
And so they just have this foundation of building their platform, their political platform from Māori foundations. And so, of course, in something like this, it would be extremely heartfelt. And he would have meant this. It would have been heartfelt. It would have been real. But yeah, absolute fall from grace.
He says at this time, so this is in the reading of that settlement bill, Pite Paraone says, as I continue to read this historical claim, it is quite plain that the Crown abdicated its responsibilities to the iwi Te Kawerau Ā Maki. Nowhere was this exemplified more than in the 1844 to 55 period, when the Crown waived its rights to preemption. So just to explain, in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Crown agreed that before selling any land, they would give iwi the rights. No.
No, the other way around.
Can you explain that?
Oh, well, in Article 2, we agree to only sell to the Crown.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not exactly sure. Nowhere was this exemplified more than in the 1845 to 55 period when the Crown waived its right of preemption, which allowed for private individuals to negotiate with Māori.
So instead of going through the Crown.
So the Crown was meant to intervene, essentially. The first notice of any kind of sale, because under Te Tiriti, if land were to leave the hands of Māori, it must have gone through the Crown.
Right.
So here it's talking about they did not intervene. You got the New Zealand company
Yes.
who was running around making people sign agreements and saying, hey, look, I've put your name on this piece of paper and it says now that we own this land. So
I was vaguely trying to say that land is meant to go to the Crown first
kapai.
before selling to any private owner. And they knew that this was a necessary step to protecting Māori land. Instead, they just let the settlers negotiate directly with Māori owners. And this is skipping a very, 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 very important point, which is at this stage, the Crown changed the way that title was held. Because prior to colonization, it was just communally held by the iwi in its entirety. This didn't work for colonizers because it made it very hard for them to negotiate with the whole iwi to sell land, right? So they needed to transfer it into individual title or the next best thing, which in their case, they transferred it to 10 people limit of title over a land. And it was easier to negotiate and take it from 10 people. They also only needed one representative for that 10 people, for example. So they did things like that to legally change the title to make it allow them, settlers, to negotiate with one person instead of what traditionally would have been hundreds of people, potentially thousands of people. So they changed the law, made the law arbitrarily belong to certain individuals that were able to be negotiated with, and they were able to sign off the land and give it all to settlers. So let's keep reading this Paraone speech from New Zealand First. He says that they failed to apply the regulations it had established to protect Māori in these circumstances. The next decade was no better for this iwi, as the Crown undertook a program of acquisition that saw much of their lands alienated from them. Between 1920 and 1951, the iwi lost their remaining interests in Kopironui and Puketapu blocks to the Crown by way of compulsory purchase under the Public Works Act. So that's them saying, look, we have to build this public infrastructure, so we're taking it from you whether you like it or not. They call it compulsory purchase. I call it theft.
Killed up.
He goes on to say that this iwi was left virtually landless would be an understatement. This is New Zealand First saying this. In reality, the only title they hold is the inaccessible title to another area. The Crown gave them a piece of land that they couldn't even access. That's how freaking rude they are. Part of the settlement includes a payment of 300,000 to a marae. So you know how we told you they're the only Auckland iwi without a marae? the government agreed we're going to give you a pitiful $300,000 to build a new marae. Paraone rightfully acknowledges, can I suggest to this house, in this day and age, $300,000 would probably meet the cost of one toilet. I really believe that this is some insult, not denying the intention of the Crown, to provide only this level of payment. However, we support this bill. So, New Zealand First acknowledges all these harms that Te Kawerau Ā Maki has experienced. That they were left landless. That $300,000 to build a marae is an insult. In 2014, this is a stance of New Zealand First. And so to take all of that into account, and that they know all of that, and still to go and attack Te Kawerau Ā Maki for simply trying to enter into some sort of relationship over their own ancestral lands is beyond shameful for New Zealand First.
Yeah.
Beyond shameful.
Yeah, beyond shameful. So this was so they know the context, right? They know what Te Kawerau Ā Maki has gone through. And now let's look at another act. So Taranaki Maunga, right? Recently got its personhood status, and it has gone into a co-governance arrangement. And this is all very recent. What I'm about to read has come from January at the start of this year. Okay, so this is Jenny Maycroft, I think. Yeah, Marcroft. They say Maycroft though, right? It's like English how they. And so what does Maycroft say here? I am absolutely humbled and honoured to speak on behalf of New Zealand First in support of Te Pire Whakatupua Mo Te Kāhui Tupua / Taranaki Maunga Collective Redress Bill. I love it when they're like so long, these names.
Oh, you should watch the politicians try and say it. It's
oh
hilarious.
man, yeah, when they put a huge name like this and it's all te reo Māori and the politicians have to say it and they're just like struggling through it. It's painful, but it's funny. This bill recognises the Crown's historic breaches of the treaty in relation to Taranaki Maunga, including confiscation of 1.2 million acres of Taranaki lands. The national park, including Taranaki Maunga and the surrounding peaks, will be vested in a legal person named Te Kāhui Tupua. Tēnā koe.
Kāhui Maunga.
The entity that will act on behalf of Te Kāhui Tupua will have 8 members on it, 4 appointed by iwi, unelected iwi, 4 appointed by the Ministry of Conservation, and it will be called Te Tōpuni Kokorangi.
Hold on a minute.
Right?
I smell co-governance.
What is that? Are you good with this?
So how come New Zealand First is totally fine with Taranaki Maunga to be completely actually co-governant?
Yeah.
But are now throwing a hissy fit over a non-co-governance arrangement, simply a deed of acknowledgement?
I think it's because they're such a small iwi. And they're
that they can pick on them?
I think he's just like, yeah, let's pick on this little iwi.
That's pathetic.
What's been happening here with Taranaki Maunga has been going on for a really long time. And if you looked at the recent ceremonies that took place in acknowledgement of this, it was huge. And it's been celebrated. It's a very positive story. This Taranaki Maunga personhood status is a very positive story.
It just goes to show the selective compassion by the colonizers.
They're just picking and choosing their battles. Picking and choosing their battles. And I think, they should have kicked up a fuss. It's funny. They got Jenny to read out this one. Like,
who's she again?
Pākehā looking. Well, I think she has whakapapa Māori actually.
Did she used to be their president?
I think she's a bit of a Northlander. I think she used to be like maybe a vice. Anyway, she hasn't really done a whole lot of notable stuff because of course they get Shane to be the one to push pretty much everything through. But I would have thought that they would have gotten Shane to speak to this because of it being a settlement. But no.
They fully support this co-governance board for Taranaki Maunga.
They fully support it. And so, they're picking and choosing their battles. They have no consistency. And that's the classic summary, I think, of New Zealand First. They have no values. They have no consistency. They pick their battles based on whatever suits their agenda. And they'll just flip-flop around and try and score points just essentially pretty much anywhere they can. And the next thing that I was going to bring up is this article from Te Kawerau Ā Maki. Well, it's not from them, but it includes some responses from them. Here is Te Kawerau Ā Maki Chief Executive Edward Ashby. Tēnā koe, te rangatira.
Tēnā koe.
He's great. He's really called them out. He's called them out for what he says is mischief, and that they're spreading misinformation and that they're scaremongering. And he encourages New Zealand First and David Seymour from ACT to learn to read, I think, or go back and read the agreement. He gives some really great comments in this article if you want a bit more of an explainer of what's going on. But there were some particular quotes that I did want to bring up, but unfortunately we haven't highlighted them. But it is a great article. It covers most of the bases.
What did you want to talk about though?
Oh, I'm not really sure. I think he gives some. The legislation in question is actually a local bill. You know, that's a great thing to reiterate. You know, it is an Auckland Council kaupapa. So the fact that Shane Jones and Nicola Willis and all of these people are even getting involved is ridiculous. But they highlight in here how, you know, there's no change of ownership or change of decision making, and they're simply doing what Te Kawerau Ā Maki are already doing, and just that they're just following processes, and that it's to improve the future of the Waitākere Ranges and ensure the investment is going in the right place. They're just formalizing what is already taking place. He says it's nothing like the co-governance the government approved a couple months ago of Taranaki, you know, so they're acknowledging it's a completely different kind of kaupapa.
And acknowledging the fact that there wasn't a big fuss thrown over the co-governance over Taranaki.
I realize that now we should have put a note here, eh? We're still learning how to do this. So the reason why I wanted to bring back this article is something that Shane Jones said that I thought was interesting. He says, oh, what are you trying to do?
Oh, I was just going to say that actually it is in the notes.
Well, we need to use our notes. That's hilarious. Okay, so this is what Shane Jones said, and it kind of like pricked my ears a little bit. What about the trampers? What about the runners? What about the walkers? You know, he gives this little list of these people, the trampers, the runners, the walkers. And it's interesting. There is a group called Walk, Tramp, Run. Walk, Tramp, Run. And the spin-off, they've done an article about this kaupapa. It's a pretty decent article if you want to read it. The new agreement to protect the Waitākere Ranges is on the table. Here's what it means from Liam Ratana. In his article, he kind of covers a good amount of it, and then he says, is there any opposition? And he says, yes. Not everyone supports the proposal. Earlier this month, the group Walk, Tramp, Run, and this is the problem that I have with the article, he says, which represents recreational users of the ranges. You know, it makes it kind of sound like, yeah, he says that as a fact, and he kind of makes it sound like it's a big group. Okay. And now I'm just wondering, has there been communication between this group, Walk, Tramp, Run, and Shane Jones? Because for Shane Jones to particularly here single out and say, what about the trampers? What about the runners? What about the walkers? These three groups. And now we've got this group who literally call themselves Walk, Tramp, Run. We know a little bit about this group. They started last year, at the beginning of 2024 in February.
Right.
And here is another article by a blog group called The Jackal. I don't know anything about The Jackal actually, but just when I was doing my research, I came across this blog site, and they seem to do some good mahi actually, but I actually don't know anything about them. So, but they talk about this Walk, Tramp, Run group, and they pointed out that the spin-off mischaracterized them as representing Waitākere Ranges recreational users, because as this blog points out, they have a very limited membership. And when we started looking into this Walk, Tramp, Run group more, they did a presentation to Auckland Council around Cody Dieback, and I think this was like just a couple months ago, and in that video they said that their group only has about 50 members. 50 members. They have 50 members. So in the spin-off article, it's really misleading. And I don't know how Liam got this information to frame it like this, but it definitely frames them as if they're
It's like-
a larger kind of group.
Which represents 50 recreational users of the ranges. That's it.
And he's saying, is there any opposition? Oh yeah, there's this group of 50 people that have given some opposition. But also in this article, and I can't prove this at all, so just put it there. The writer of this blog post says it lacks broad community backing and appears to simply be another branch of the Stop Co-Governance Brigade. So I don't know what evidence they have to support that. I haven't been able to find any, but considering Julian Batchelor, who runs Stop Co-Governance, that he previously was on New Zealand First's list.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And it's because of Julian Batchelor that they revived their previous Treaty Principles Deletion Bill. That's what they used to call it. Julian Batchelor, at a more recent New Zealand First conference, he brought it up again and said, hey, we should go back to this idea. Well, I don't know if he was posing it as like a new idea, but we know that it's been on New Zealand First's agenda for a long time. And my suspicion is that they just said, hey, Julian, can you bring this one back up to the top of the table again? Can you pass that, or can you put forward that motion, and we'll get that ball rolling again? It's because of him, or at least he participated in bringing it back, that New Zealand First is currently going through their review, or their remove/review of the 28 references to treaty principles from legislation. And we know that it's just about removing, right? Because the bill was previously called the Treaty Principles Deletion Bill, right? So who knows if there is that connection between this Walk, Tramp, Run group and the Stop Co-Governance tour, but...
Quickly on this comment about, does Shane Jones ever do tramping himself? Like, regardless of whether he does or not, he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a shit about people who enjoy the environment. He doesn't give a shit about trampers and walkers and runners. He's just saying this because it fits his current political agenda. But in reality, he doesn't give a shit about us people who actually do go out and enjoy the environment. Otherwise, he wouldn't be actively taking steps to destroy said environment, to mine on conservation land, to attack the indigenous species that we love to see while we're walking and so on. So yeah, this is just the epitome of astroturfing, isn't it? To speak on behalf of communities that you're actually not only not caring about, but are actively attacking through your own policies. So yeah, I agree with this comment about Shane Jones not tramping, but I don't mean that as a personal attack. I mean that in the sense of him astroturfing and not giving a shite about us, the rest of us who do genuinely enjoy the environment.
Killed it. Kapai. Oh, what are you doing? What are you doing with the mouse? Oh, there I am. All right. Okay. So what else have we got? Right. So we looked into who actually runs this. I can't remember the name, even though it's so simple. Walk, Tramp, Run group. The guy who runs the group, his name is Norman Judd. And this Norman Judd character who runs, what is it called? Walk, Tramp, Run. He manages walking tracks. He has a history of managing even walking tracks around the Waitākere Ranges. He used to be, I think it says on here, he was 3 years chief ranger of the Waitākere Ranges Regional Park, Auckland Regional Council. And now he has a company, a business called Track Shape. And what do? They do data capture. Audits of the park's service performance. They have a 400-kilometer baseline survey of the Hunua and Waitākere Ranges tracks, systems using the DCB Track Shape method. So this guy benefits from having tracks open. He certainly does not benefit from some type of group that he's excluded from, right? There are groups who are going to be influencing the Waitākere Ranges and how those areas are managed. They will be having some level of influence, or at least this is what this man is fearful of. And from reading what we've got here on this trackshape.co.nz website, he has a conflict of interest in terms of what is happening here. He's not just a concerned individual. Literally, his business is at risk of being impacted by what's going on here. So why doesn't he just be upfront about that instead of creating, an AstroTurf group to apparently carry the concerns of the public, you know.
Yeah, and I just find it really problematic for these news media to be like spin-off, to be mentioning this group, Walk, Track, Run, without mentioning that they make their money off counting the numbers of visitors to the parks, which is one of the stated aims on their website. So if there's no visitors going to those certain areas, they will lose business. They make their money from tracking visitors to specific tracks. That's one of the ways that they make their money. So there's a direct conflict of interest for what's his name?
Norman Judd.
Norman Judd. And what's funny, we didn't bring it up, I think, but he's in an interview with The Platform.
Oh, we'll get to that now. So this is another one of the reasons why we think potentially he could be linked with Julian Batchelor.
But in another interview, I was going to mention actually, and Sean Plunker interviews him about this Walk, Track, Run thing. He interviews him about this. Oh no, is it about this one?
I believe it is. But what story have you got? How have we got another story about?
Oh no, just the one where he's like, I'm glad
talking
you're
about
not a cooker.
Māori. Yeah, that's we'll have to find that at the end of this little. We haven't actually got it timestamped, so I don't know how much of this Sean Plunkett rant we have to listen to. I'll just preface it with a bit of context. So, there is a lot of stuff going around. There is a lot of stuff going on around Cody dieback disease, right? And there are streams of funding that have been going out to iwi groups who run conservation type kaupapa. And so, we have the Taxpayers Union coming out against these groups and coming out against government funding that has been given to these groups to explore potential indigenous solutions empowered through mātauranga Māori, solutions like that nature into saving our Cody trees. And, it is a new space. It's a new space. It's the kind of space that you have to explore it to understand it. People are all like, oh, it's mumbo jumbo going down the mātauranga route. Why don't you just keep investing into the Western science route, which we have been doing for generations and it's not working
so well for us, right?
So we do have to explore these new areas. We have to grow. We have to evolve. We have to change and adapt. We can't just keep doing the same thing over and over, right? So some money is shifting around in terms of going from these Western conservation groups into indigenous groups, hapu-led groups who are more going down that mātauranga Māori route. And so we're having groups like the Taxpayers Union and a lot of other groups speak out against that to protect the status quo, people who have the current money, instead of it going to these new groups. And so there's a lot of narrative out there around hapu-led groups and efforts to try and address Cody dieback. And so Sean has that in his mind. And he wants this guy's opinion about it because Norman Judd, he has spoken out against Cody dieback. And I'm not going to get into the science of that stuff, and it's not really something that I understand. But essentially, Sean wanted to bring him on the show so that they can dismiss all of that stuff. Hopefully that was some good enough context and not confusing, but we'll just have a listen and see where it goes from there.
Māori accent became very trendy a few years back.
Back a little bit more.
Now, this story in mainstream media for young journalists who wanted to say Kauri with a Māori accent became very trendy a few years back.
Joke?
Every story was about Kauri dieback. It was all a kind of code for aren't Kauri wonderful Maori trees, and it's because white people don't understand, don't have a connection to the land. And suddenly the solution was you couldn't go near a Kauri tree. It was sacred. And we were going to spend millions making raised walkways and millions paying whale song to the Kauri trees. Are you telling me it's scientifically possible that that's all claptrap?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. But on the other hand, we have to go back to 2015, 16, 17, 18.
So essentially just there, we heard it from this Norman Judd. Sean put the words in his mouth, right, saying that it's claptrap, that it's ridiculous. And Norm agreed with him. And for me, that's enough to understand Norman's perspective on things. Obviously, he does not think that there is any value in Mātauranga Māori.
Initially, the walkers, trampers and runners were horrified by what the council and the MPI, Ministry of Primary Industries, were telling us. And gradually we've started to deal, and now we're on the cusp, the threshold of saying this is a load of rubbish because you're not explaining yourselves, both in the European terms of science, as well as we want to know about Mātauranga, Tikanga, and all the rest, to help us understand what you'll keep.
Yeah, well, that's all mumbo jumbo, Normal. It's all rubbish. It's not science.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
Okay, so there's Norman Judd admitting that he thinks Mātauranga Māori, Tikanga Māori, and what was the third thing he listed, are all rubbish, are all mumbo jumbo. So that's the guy who leads this group that is now being used as a representative group of trampers against this Te Kawerau Ā Maki deed. A person who clearly has very strong views about Māori, who has a business that relies on these tracks continuing. So he's racist against Māori. He has a business that relies on things continuing as usual and doesn't want any disruptions, even if it's for the protection of the environment. That's the person that leads this group that they're centering as some kind of representative group of trampers.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And here's another group that has been...
They started it off all way.
I think they definitely sounded the alarm bell early. A lot of people will know about this group, Democracy Action. If you look at some of their campaigns, like this is a good way to just get a vibe of the type of group. Is the government staying true to its promises? Are they being racist enough? You know, the true Treaty of Waitangi, fear-mongering around He Puapua, health reforms. You know, they're talking about the Māori Health Authority here. The Great Beach Giveaway. What is this about? The High Court granting iwi customary rights to some marine areas. Māori wards, 3 waters, co-governance, treaty-based local governance, sites of significance. You know, so it's all anti-Māori. All of their campaigns are anti-Māori. So pretty much like just another Hobson's pledge.
There are so many of them, folks. There are so many of them.
And I looked at like who runs Democracy Action, Lee Short, and I couldn't find heaps about Lee Short, but I know that he did an oral submission in support of the Treaty Principles Bill, which like you could
all of them made submissions for, eh?
Yeah.
All of the racists made submissions.
But anyway, I just thought here's another group who oppose what's going on, and they've got a bit of a following. You know, I know Democracy Action are quite active, and look, they got a nice website. It looks nice, and so like I feel like they've been doing quite a lot of mahi, and they've probably got a good email list, right, in terms of who they communicate with. So I thought, and I know this is a terrible way to display it, but can never quite get it right. I thought we'd go through their criticisms and respond to them, give our opinion on it, because they've highlighted some points to consider in terms of what they would like people to focus on in terms of making a submission to the Auckland Council against this deed of acknowledgement. Come on. So I'm gonna give you the point.
Smash some myths.
I'll give you the point, and you have to give me your response.
Okay.
Okay. So something that they think would be important for people to consider: the Waitākere Ranges Heritage Act, 2008, does not suggest a constitutional change to allow non-elected people to have a co-governance role over the publicly owned heritage area.
Fact. That is true. That is true. The Act explicitly says, if you go and look at the Heritage Area Act, explicitly says that deed of acknowledgement does not allow those people any decision-making powers whatsoever. So that's true, I think, unless I'm misunderstanding it.
Just that's complete fear-mongering. It's another fearmonger to even suggest around co-governance here again. The Waitākere Ranges Heritage Act 2008 does not suggest a constitutional change to allow non-elected people to have a co-governance role. Like you say, fact. And I was just like, oh, is that all you're going to say? But for me, it's fear-mongering. To put this at the top and to suggest that that is what's happening when it isn't.
It's kind of like Nicola Willis saying, oh, that the Act doesn't say they need to set up a board.
Okay, anyway, next one. The proposed deed of acknowledgement would add another layer of bureaucracy with the purpose of giving tangata whenua a formal decision-making role in the management of the Waitākere Ranges heritage area.
So again, it's not a decision-making role. It's explicitly not a decision-making role. It's just a consultation role. It's just relationship building. It's just talking to each other because they know that Te Kawerau Ā Maki is the original owner of this land, and because they don't want to give them the land back, so the next best thing is being like, "Okay, we'll talk to you about the land." And now they're even angry that that discussion is even happening. So that's a lie.
Yeah. Okay. Next one: establishing a joint committee with equal representation from tangata whenua on one side, and Auckland Council and the Crown on the other, would place a disproportionate amount of power in the hands of one sector of the community. Such an approach overlooks the principle of equality.
I mean, that one is just completely inverting reality, right? Because it's obvious who holds the power. It's the Crown who holds the power. The Crown who stole all the land from Te Kawerau Ā Maki and still holds on to it today. The Crown who has made Te Kawerau Ā Maki fundraise to buy their own land back, to build their own marae back on their own land. It's the Crown who, don't think we even went through this, but in the settlement they only gave Te Kawerau Ā Maki a pitiful total of $6.5 million. That's it.
Yeah, we did forget that.
For all the land that they stole, for destroying their entire livelihood, all their past sites, everything, for taking everything from them, they gave them $6.5 million back, and they still hold on to all of that land. So I think the people with disproportionate power are the Crown. So I reject the premise entirely.
Come back. Next one. The joint committee would weaken democratic governance of this public space and reduce accountability to the community, and the public would not be able to hold the tangata whenua members of the joint committee to account every 3 years and decide whether or not to replace them, like citizens under democratic governance. Therefore, the tangata whenua members would have no incentive to take into account the wishes and interests of the rest of the community.
It's again inverting reality, because the current democratic process has already dismissed the will of the people. They already dismiss what's best for the people. They're already deeply corrupt. Tangata whenua would be the only body in there to disrupt that corrupt process. They would be the only body that steps in there and is like, our entire commitment is to protect the land, and that's it. We have no other agendas like the rest of you councillors. We have no other agendas like you central government. Literally just want to protect the environment. So what they're saying there is, again, inverting reality, which is that the current democratic processes flies in the face of what people want. Like, can I just take people back? Again, Waitākere is my home, or what used to be my home before I moved here. They actually held a referendum over the governance of the Waitākere Ranges. I don't know if everyone remembers this, but they actually held an extremely expensive referendum in which the vast majority of us, something like 90%, was a while ago now, I can't remember, said that we want Waitākere Ranges to remain separate from the Auckland super city. We wanted our own governance structure for Waitākere. The government ignored the massive majority of voters that said in that referendum we wanted to keep Waitākere. They ignored us and lumped Waitākere within the Auckland super city, which people who lived there at the time knew that had a horrific impact on our area. So many of our local services disintegrated within the fog of this giant Auckland super city. Things that were quite hyper-focused on our area, quite hyper-focused on the issues of Waitākere, all of a sudden melted away under the priorities of the Auckland super city, which is giant. So it was actually the central government that moved us away from localism to greater power in central government in the first place. And now, with this attack, they're actually moving us away from localism even further, because Te Kawerau Ā Maki represents that local voice. They represent the people of the land who really care about Waitākere on a really deep, visceral level.
They're definitely more locals than Shane Jones.
100%.
Or this Democracy Action Group. Well, I'm not sure where they're from, but, Te Kawerau Ā Maki, they're at the heart. They are tangata whenua, they're mana whenua. And to say that they're not connected, they're in the heart. They're in the heart of members of the public in terms of people who would represent the Waitākeres. And so, The Auckland Council have made a decision on this. Their elected members, right, of Auckland Council have made a decision on this to progress this. Locals have made their decisions on this to progress this. And now we're seeing this central government intervening in this way, as you say, just taking us as further and further and further away from local democracy. And this meddling to try and change those local democratic processes that have already gone through to give this the green light are being fiddled with. And it's it's a good summary of how this government has been behaving. They talk about devolution and power from central government into local initiatives and whatnot. But like with the Māori wards, you know, even though so many people have agreed to have Māori wards, they're still forcing local councils to run referendums on whether or not they should
Everything
keep
they've done
Māori
has been
wards.
anti-democracy, anti-local democracy, centralized government. And this is a perfect example. It's a local government act. It's a council decision that a council has been democratically elected, and they've reached a decision that they're happy with the local iwi, and central government is stepping in on top of that.
Yeah. Kapai. So we won't go through these. It's just more fear-mongering around
institutionalized racial division.
It's all the like slippery slope ones. Like you see this last one here. The Joint Committee would institutionalize racial division, just saying that as a fact, which could foster a them and us mentality.
That's what you're doing.
With the danger of morphing into a them versus us mindset. This has the potential to harm social cohesion and negatively affect race relations, because race relations is going so great at the moment, right? An interesting article, good segue into this one. Iwi Crown relations on the line after scathing report or scathing audit. There are some awesome articles that have come out. This one I highly recommend. It's on RNZ. Sharon Brett Kelly, thank you for this one. And this article talks about a report that has recently come out from the Auditor General. Okay. And the Auditor General has been pointing out how public sectors, public organizations have not been meeting their obligations in terms of treaty settlements. And he's putting out the warning that these public organizations not meeting their Treaty o Waitangi obligations is opening up them and the government to legal challenges. Because, in these settlements and whatnot, they're putting legal obligations. And something that's highlighted here in this report, this article in particular, and they have a podcast episode about it that goes in deeper, and it's really good. I highly recommend it. They talk about how for a settlement, Māori have had to navigate the central government ngārara, beast, the central government beast, to get a settlement across the line. And so many people talk about it, especially Margaret Mutu in her report, where she talks about, in general, we receive less than 1% of the value back. She talks about how the treaty settlement process rips families apart, right? Because when you do a treaty settlement, you're having to divide things up, you're having to say who gets what, and that whole process is incredibly divisive. Greed comes into it, and because we're getting crumbs back, it can be incredibly messy. And that is the fault of the Crown. They have exacerbated the negative aspects of the treaty settlement process by making it pittance that we get back, right? So we have to navigate central government and we have to get over all of the hurdles. And then, okay, finally, they put through a settlement. Finally, we get that over the line. We get it through Parliament. They vote on it. It's accepted. Woohoo. They will put specific things into the treaty settlement, and some of those specific obligations get delegated to local government. And so they've just gone through this huge process of having central government finally give something, but now the responsibilities and the roles of fulfilling those obligations has been passed on to a completely new, a new ngārara, a new beast that they then have to negotiate. And that's one of the main things that is being highlighted in this report. They say that there are 150 public organizations that have about 12,000 individual contractual and legal commitments under about 80 settlements. And they say that the public organizations that it audited are responsible for 70% of individual commitments. And they say the audit found that every one of the public organizations had difficulties meeting some of their commitments. So every organization that was audited had some level of difficulty reaching these commitments. And it's a classic example of what has just happened here with Te Kawerau Ā Maki. Auckland Council has put through this deed of acknowledgement, and they're following through with the directive that has been given from central government to create this deed of acknowledgement. They're carrying through with that process, and now we're having central government, or at least Shane Jones, kick back against that. Even though this report has come out from the Auditor General that we need to be wary that our public organizations are not meeting their treaty or Waitangi obligations, and that is opening us up to legal challenges and could cost the New Zealand economy, you know, probably millions, billions of dollars. We're seeing central government involve themselves again. So shame Jones, shame on you. Shame on you being a whanaunga to Ngāpuhi and knowing what Te Kawerau Ā Maki has done. Shame on your party for...
Been through.
Exactly. Shame on your government for reading out what you read out in regards to when you accepted the Te Kawerau Ā Maki settlement and the kōrero that you gave in support of Taranaki Maunga, and then not being consistent and applying that to what is currently going on with this deed of acknowledgement. It boggles my mind, and it's just emblematic that this government, particularly New Zealand First, will flip-flop. They will pick their battles, that they have no values, and that whatever they think they can do to help their agenda, they will do, regardless of anything that they have said in the past. So for me, New Zealand First, Shane Jones, no integrity. No integrity.
Massive
They're
shame.
making things worse, even though they say they're fighting division. For me, they are the party of division, potentially more than the ACT Party. The ACT Party, you know, they're just like next level kind of overtly divisive. But I think New Zealand First, well, maybe they're as sneaky as each other. I don't really know. But the way that Shane Jones has tried to put this narrative out there, just think it's shameful. And we didn't call him Shame Jones, but when we said that we were doing this episode, everyone was commenting saying Shame Jones. And I was like, you know what?
It's gonna stick.
We should do that. His name is now Shame Jones. And I think, you know, we can call him a kupapa. I think there's nothing wrong with calling Shame Jones a kupapa. I think for some people that kupu is a little bit tapu. But if you are progressing, if you're working to cement the negative impacts of colonization, if you're wanting to promote and strengthen ongoing colonization by the Crown against Te iwi Māori, you are a kupapa. Back in the day, what were kupapa? They were Māori who worked with the Crown to dispossess Māori and to fight Māori, to kill Māori, but primarily to cement the colonial plan and ideology here in Aotearoa. And that's what we see New Zealand First doing. Shane Jones, you a kupapa. And I think we should normalize that type of language, and we should normalize calling him out. He talks about Te Taitokirau in the north as if he's like, you know, the matua, you know, oh, not while the matua is here, but I think as someone pointed it out in the comments, he really doesn't have a base here. And we should, you know, we can just look to the last election. He tried to win the general seat here and it failed abysmally.
Yeah,
and
someone mentioned
I cannot
in the
wait to see the same thing
earlier
again.
that he does not have the support of Northland. He doesn't have the support of Ngāpuhi. This is an area that he's speaking of that he didn't catch votes in. The people do not have his backing. He's talking on behalf of the racists in the country, on the racists that back his party, not on behalf of the people of Waitākere, not on behalf of Northland, not on behalf of Ngāpuhi, that's for sure. Just want to address one of the commenters here saying that I said that it's your DNA that establishes whether you care about the environment or not. That is not at all what I said. And that is not at all what I mean. What we do say and what we do mean.
Was that this one? Have I got the right one?
No, that person has our back.
Oh, I don't know.
It's Nick C. They're saying that we say it's DNA that dictates whether you care about the environment or not. What we are saying is that iwi Māori who developed their culture with this land, the indigenous people of this land, who were then colonized. Colonization means not just to arrive on this land on a waka, as some Hobson's Pledge type people are trying to imply. Colonization is the intrusion of another culture, of another state, onto someone else's land that already exists there, and then trying to erase those people and imprint their own land. That is colonization. It's a very clear definition. Māori did not do that because there was no one settled on this land. No human being was settled on this land when Māori came. They came here and they developed the culture with the land. So that culture that developed with the land is so deeply connected with the well-being of the land because they understood over hundreds and hundreds of years, over 800 years of living here, they understood that their well-being relied on the well-being of the land. That's why a lot of the processes changed over that time. And you can look at graphs of how much forests were destroyed when Māori first arrived versus how they stopped destroying forests. It
tapers off. It tapers off. So you can see they learnt.
And they learned. They stopped. They stopped doing a lot of the processes they did. They realized that they needed to protect the environment. And for a long period of time before colonizers came, Māori were living in an equilibrium with the environment. There wasn't destruction of the environment. The waterways, when colonizers arrived here, were pristine. You could drink from them. You can drink from any of the waterways of the land. Can you even imagine how amazing that would be? Because for me now, that's a dream. The idea of driving around the country and drinking from any waterway of the land. Okay? Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about Māori having a greater collection of the land, it's nothing to do with DNA. You have to broaden your mind a little bit more than that, my friend Nick. It's to do with that connection that was developed over 800 years of living here and relying on the health of the land. When colonizers came on the other side, they brought a different ideology. They specifically brought an ideology of exploitation, extraction, and genocide. That was their explicit intention. I'm not making this up. When they came here, they said, we've come here to replace the indigenous people with ourselves, with our ways, with our treatment of the land, which was so destructive. They were like, let's destroy the forests and replace them with farms. They were like, let's drain the wetlands so that we can replace them with farms. They were like, let's pump chemicals onto the land so we can grow our farms. So on and so forth. They were like, let's disrespect tangata whenua, take their land from underneath men and burn them. That's what colonizers did. That's not me making them up. That's just what colonizers did. They destroyed the environment. They destroyed the waterways. Look at our waterways now. You can't drink from them. The vast majority you can't drink from. We can still drink from our river, very thankfully, but even that, some people say that we shouldn't. Some people say we should be careful. You can't even swim in 2/3 of our rivers now. That's all colonizers doing in 200 years versus 800 years of Māori living here. In 200 years, colonizers were able to destroy the vast majority of waterways. That is not an opinion. That is a fact. An uncomfortable fact, my friend Nick, but a fact nonetheless. So when I'm talking about a greater relationship with the land, I'm not talking about your DNA or race or any outrageous thing like that. I'm talking about the physical reality of growing your culture with the land, and a culture that explicitly says ko o te awa, ko awa te au. That's just what Māori say. That's what Māori believe. That's the culture. We are the water is us. By the way, a scientifically proven fact. You can now prove it with science that we are made up mostly of water. But Māori knew this. And they knew this in an embodied way. They knew this in a realistic way, not in just a scientific write it in a journal and move on with their lives, but they knew that they had to protect the waterways in order to protect themselves. And Māori will tell you today that we're sick because the water is sick. So I'm talking about that deep knowledge that was developed over that long period of time of coexisting with the land. without the Western imperial colonial culture of extraction, of destruction, of greed, of capitalism, because don't forget capitalism came with colonization. So when we're talking about indigenous values, we're really talking about values that existed before capitalism disrupted our brains. Because what did capitalism do? It came onto the land and convinced us that it's all about extraction and greed, about turning the health of the environment into dollars. That's what colonizers taught us. That's the culture of colonizers. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of cultures that care for the environment and colonial cultures which do not. Nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with colonization and Western European culture of that time that came to Aotearoa. They were going around the whole entire planet doing this. They were pillaging and destroying the whole entire planet. They were genociding people the world over. That was the culture of the colonizers they brought here, whether you like it or not, my friend. That was the culture they brought here. That's what they were doing all around the world. They were burning forests everywhere. They were killing indigenous people and animals everywhere. They were turning the land into money everywhere. That's the culture of the colonizers. That's what we're trying to decolonize today by bringing back some of the indigenous values that existed on this land before colonization. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes great sense. Oh, man. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Nick, for getting some arc going. Let's answer Nick's next question. He's our favorite. We're about to end here, I think, though. We've kind of gone through everything. But since we're on the kaupapa of responding to people, Nick has now said, why the need for DNA-based, governance-based groups on what you've just said? And so, like, you know, this is exactly what we're talking about. They don't have to be DNA-based. They essentially have to be grievance-based.
Yes.
It's not about the DNA. You know, we're not giving a particular role to that guy over there because he has a little bit of Māori DNA. We're giving it to that guy over there because he is a part of that whānau who had their marae destroyed. And for them then to have that intergenerational trauma be a part of their reality. If you're a part of that group, if you are part of that demographic, then we will acknowledge that you are a demographic that needs to be consulted with. It has nothing to do with DNA, but it does have a lot to do with who you are. But it's not a DNA-based thing. It's a grievance-based thing. That's why with treaty settlements, you have to list exactly what your grievance is for. It's not just that you walk up to the tribunal and say, oh, hey, I'm Māori, can I have some money? You need to evidence a particular grievance. That's what it's all about. Particular grievances, not about blood quantum and what percentage of Māori or Pākehā or Japanese or whatever you are. It's grievance based. And also, with like Three Waters, for example, that was going to be a 50-50 board. Yes, mana whenua, and mana whenua, hapu, the particular mana whenua group of that area, not just random people who have Māori blood. It is a particular demographic who has faced a particular grievance for that area. And the Three Waters one, it was going to be a 50-50 co-governance board that then decided on the management board.
Oh boy.
And so those 50-50 who are from those, the 50% who are there because of their hapu connections, they might have chosen non-Māori. They might have delegated their roles to non-Māori in terms of the management board that the co-governance board was delegating roles to.
Or even Māori who didn't represent their iwi.
Yeah.
Who didn't represent the hapu, who were potentially kupapa themselves. Who knows?
Yeah, anyway, I hope that answered your pātai, Nick. We do appreciate you being here, and everyone who does come and they don't agree with us, you know, we love people throwing in their whakaaro. We love when it gets us going on topics that we're passionate about. So for anyone who's ever thinking about throwing us any pātai, do feel free to do so. We do really appreciate it. And everyone who's here who disagrees with our whakaaro, we really appreciate you being here. So kia ora, thank you for the pātai. All right, so any other things that we wanted to talk about tonight? I think we've made it through all of our links.
Technically, no.
We were going to talk about Margaret Mutu and the great mahi that she does.
Can you
What do you want? What do you
bring
need?
he pupua up for me? The actual he pupua agreement. No, it should be easy to find. I just want to talk about what co-governance is super quickly. And that, you know, it came from, where? Don't open it from their website.
Yeah, it's fine. It's the same. It is still the actual report.
Okay, I wouldn't give them a click if I were you, but
Hey,
a discussion to have after the
you
stream.
gotta do it when you got it.
No.
Gotta do what you gotta do.
But, no, because I got this
well,
photocopy.
It is a bit of a difficult document to find.
Oh, I did find it beforehand. Don't worry about it. The point is in Heupupua they discuss this term co-governance. They bring up this term co-governance, and what it is they show you that you have the sphere of the Kāwanatanga, so that's the crown sphere, and then if you can just search co-governance, yeah, and just zoom in there, please. So, wow, so small. Okay, so you've got the Kāwanatanga sphere, that's a circle, and then the rangatiratanga sphere.
Let's go on a little bit more. We should just draw this. We should just pull up paint.
I actually think there's another diagram in this that's better.
Martiki Mai will show you the better ones.
Anyway, so you've got the crown. That's the current colonial crown that we all live under, that circle. Then you've got the rangatiratanga space. That's a sphere where Māori self-determination, Māori making decisions for their own people. And what they're saying is just logically, if you're going to have these two spheres of influence in the country, they're going to have to talk to each other because that's just how countries work. There's going to be overlapping interests like regional parks and rivers and da-da-da-da-da. And so they're saying this relational partnership space is the place that's called co-governance, in between the rangatiratanga space and the Kāwanatanga space. This relational sphere is what they refer to as co-governance. Now, the issue that we've had is consecutive governments, Labour as well, referring to things that are Crown implemented through the Crown's power in a body organized by the Crown, in the law that's created by the Crown, that has Māori people on their boards, and then calling that co-governance. But actually, in reality, all of it is occurring within the Kāwanatanga sphere. At the same time, Labour and whoever, not empowering the rangatiratanga space, not giving real money, energy, power, or narrative towards building up the rangatiratanga space. What do I mean by that? I mean giving money to iwi and hapu to build their own Māori for Māori solutions, like kura kaupapa. Perfect example. Māori Health Authority is an interesting one because it still came under the Kāwanatanga sphere. It was still a government initiative. And that's why when National came in, they were able to cancel that. Because it was within the Kāwanatanga sphere. Do you see what I mean?
It's like Israel being able to cut off food, gas, electricity from Palestine. From Gaza.
And so if we think about the Kāwanatanga, the crown, as an occupying force over Aotearoa, and they say, oh, we'll let you have a say here and there within our own occupation, they can take that away at any moment, which is what we're seeing with National. They can change the laws that Labour set up at any moment's time. That's the scary thing about it. That's why what we need is for governments to empower the rangatiratanga space, for them to have power outside of the crown. So it doesn't matter what the laws say of the crown, the rangatiratanga space has its own power, has its own ability to influence the conversation. Because as it stands, the influence is just coming from the Kāwanatanga space. So this term co-governance, can it really apply when we haven't even built up the governance sphere of Māori? That's my question. And that's the thing that I'm skeptical about whenever they use the term co-governance. Co implies some sort of even power standing, right? But the current power dynamics are that the crown has all the say, they giveth and they taketh away whenever they bloody want. That doesn't feel co-y to me. What it does feel is that they have no choice but to talk to iwi Māori, right? Because iwi Māori and this is in the article that we were going to read about, Margaret Mutu discussed, whether you like it or not, co-governance exists. And what she says in this article is that iwi Māori are already living in self-determining ways. She talks about her own whānau and hapu, and she says, there's no way in hell the crown can come on our land and tell us what to do ever again.
I'll read it. So she says, we've been in that mode for at least 30 years in my whānau, and there are a lot of Māori communities throughout the country like that. That's only going to keep growing. So don't worry about mana motuhake. Our people are going to get on with that regardless. She says more than that. Maybe that wasn't the quote that you were wanting. But she talks about...
yeah, that's it. And then, she says that when it comes to governing the country, ideally we'd have one sphere for one motuhake and where Māori make our own decisions, and then the kāwanatanga sphere, and where the government makes decisions for its own people, not for us. The two would work independently of each other, but then they come together and talk. That's co-governance. And she says, that's what we call the relationship sphere. That's where co-governance comes into play. That's where we always knew we would need to do the most work. And so even using the term co-governance, when we haven't even helped to, even in a narrative sense, build up the idea of tino rangatiratanga, the idea that Māori are their own sovereign nation, I find that a little problematic.
Well, we're just not able...
It implies that we're already on a even power standing.
Yeah, the co-governance sphere, the relation sphere is not... It has no integrity. If the rangatiratanga sphere doesn't have the power to hold its ground in the relational/partnership sphere, who's going to be the one there to hold the kāwanatanga sphere to account if the rangatiratanga sphere doesn't have the same amount of power?
Like right now.
It's not possible. It's really not possible. And then we're just relying on the goodwill of the kāwanatanga sphere. So that's why we need to see a redistribution of power. But it's that redistribution of power that, of course, Shane Jones, New Zealand First, and all of those types of people are afraid of. But as Margaret Mutu says, it's happening. It's only a matter of time. Like we can say...
This is where we are in this image.
Oh, yeah. The rangatiratanga sphere being
so
just tiny.
So the relationship sphere is tiny. And that's what Shane Jones is attacking right now. This tiny, tiny, tiny little sliver.
That tiny little slither that people can see there. You can't see our mouse moving about, which we've been trying to do to show people. But yeah, you can see there, right? So there's the rangatiratanga sphere, and there's just this tiny little overlap of the rangatiratanga sphere into the kāwanatanga sphere. And that small little slither that you can see there, that's where co-governance would exist. And that small slither, that is within the kāwanatanga sphere. And you can see that, obviously they would have the majority of the power if anything were to happen in that tiny little slither.
And we're seeing that today, right? The government is rolling back all of as many co-governance arrangements as they can that Labour has set up. And I would argue, as a Labour hater, that it was on Labour to entrench those somehow, whether it's to empower iwi Māori to have greater say, whether it's to constitutional transformation so that it's actually written in our constitution, not just as simple as a law that they can change. They didn't make any changes like that. And so National's able to come and get rid of all of these so-called co-governance things. And meanwhile, they're moving us further and further away of what co-governance is meant to mean, which is meant to mean the relational sphere between rangatiratanga and kāwanatanga. And it's moving us away from what Te Tiriti o Waitangi says. It's moving us away further and further from what tino rangatiratanga says. Because if people's minds now are going to think that Te Tiriti says having a chat with the iwi about their ancestral land, if that's what co-governance is, then we're slipping away from our goal. And that makes it harder for us to advocate. And so we can't meet them where they are. We can't agree that the current thing that Shane Jones is going after is co-governance. You know what I mean? And we have to hold the line of co-governance is the implementation of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, tino rangatiratanga, and the relational sphere between that and the kawanatanga. And we have to be very clear on that. And we have to be really clear that current examples of the government talking to Māori are not actually honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
And there's certainly not co-governance.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're moving into a space where any consultation with Māori, especially like formalizing consultation, like giving them seats at a table, formal consultation is now being framed as co-governance. And like, you know, the government is so awful at consultation. We look at the Kaipara local council as an example. Craig Jepson thought that consultation was the same as having a chat with an iwi representative on the side of a rugby field. Like they were watching their kids have a rugby game and he had a chat with one of the iwi reps and he called that consultation.
That's funny. Someone actually said in the comments before that guy you brought up earlier.
Norman Judd?
No, someone else, and you were like, I'm not sure who he is. Maybe from Democracy Action?
Democracy Action, maybe, yeah.
They said that he started a petition against Māori wards, which is also what Craig Jepson did. And so there's that connection between, we already knew this, that Craig Jepson has a strong connection with Democracy Action.
There is also a group called Democracy Northland who started those petitions for pushing back against Māori wards. There are a few groups, like there's also that party, Democracy NZ, I think, run by, I forget his name, but he runs for the Northland electorate. He used to be a national party. Matt King.
Oh, Lee Short, Kaimatara just said.
Yeah, Lee Short. Lee Short, I don't think runs Democracy Northland.
No, you brought him up earlier.
Yeah, he runs Democracy Action.
Yeah,
so there's Democracy Action, which is led by Lee Short. Then there's Democracy Northland, which is Frank Newman and those other people. They are the ones who started the anti-Māori wards petition with Craig Jepson. And then we have Democracy NZ. And yeah, they're all cookers, and you see it in the narrative of New Zealand First and the ACT Party and National, right? They're always talking about democracy, and the accusation or the implication of that, right, is that everything else besides them is undemocratic. Or I pulled up the campaigns of the Democracy Action group, right? It's all about anti-Māori stuff. And so if they are the ones who are championing democracy and their campaigns are all anti-Māori campaigns, then the implicit thing there is that Māori are anti-democratic. So if you see a group that has got the big wording of, democracy, you can pretty much assume that they're an anti-Māori group. I mean, maybe it's not a good rule of thumb, but it's a pattern.
I mean, it's what they're doing around the world, right? They're genociding Palestine because democracy, they're destroying the lives of people, so many of the wars that they've waged, they've said it's about democracy. So it's not a new narrative, right? Colonizers using this idea of spreading democracy.
Right, yeah, it's meant to be their great white supremacist invention that they're gifting to the rest of the world, right?
And ironically, when we're talking about Māori sovereignty, we're talking about the most direct form of democracy you can imagine. It's literally whānau-led. Your whānau has a say among collection of whānau that then come together as a hapu, and that's how decisions are made. Like, could you imagine? We're so disconnected in our current Western democratic system that we can't even imagine our family having a direct say in what happens in our own community. But that's what Māori society was all about prior to colonization. Every family had a say at what happens around their own environment, which is so logical. You should be able to have a say at what happens on your own land or what happens outside your own house. But we have been so disconnected from our own political systems that we can't even imagine a world where we actually have a say. And now you just have these white supremacists telling you that you should be not just happy to be able to have one vote every 3 years over what happens over the entire country, but you should fight for it, and that you should hatefully fight Māori for your right to have a pitiful vote once every 3 years that doesn't impact the reality of society. And what these colonizers are convincing Pākehā and other people is to go against their own interests. To go against, in this Te Kawerau Ā Maki example, The trampers and walkers and runners of Waitākere Ranges, they care about the environment. I can tell you that. I know these people. They care so much about the environment. If they truly understood that the threat to the environment was actually coming from Shane Jones, was actually coming from this government, and that Te Kawerau Ā Maki was actually trying to stop them from destroying the environment, was actually trying to protect the environment like other iwi across the land, then people's reactions would be completely different. But it comes back to the erasure. It comes back to the erasure of the fact that violent colonization dispossessed all these iwi of their land to begin with, transferred it from a local direct democratic system to a colonial system where barely anyone has a say over anything, and then planted their own myth that it's actually the indigenous people that are a threat to the environment. So actually what they're doing is completely flipping the script over, right? Shane Jones is the one that's a threat to environment, but he wants you to think it's co-governance and Māori and Te Kawerau Ā Maki, the only iwi in Auckland without a marae that's threatening the environment.
Aotearoa without a marae. One of the smallest, if not the smallest here, the only iwi in Aotearoa without a marae is coming to take over the super city, the biggest city in Aotearoa. It's one of the things, right, as well, that Shane Jones said, is he's worried about this being a slippery slope. He's worried about what's going to morph, what this is potentially going to morph into. And it's just another example of how he's not actually addressing any concerns that are present, that are part of the reality of what's being talked about. He's all about, oh, hey, let's look at the worst of an extreme that could potentially happen, and let's fearmonger around that. It's ridiculous. And so I think we'll say goodnight around about now, or at least we'll say let's start our little goodbyes. I want to say one more thing, so I'm just saying to people, we are going to finish soon. So just say your goodbyes if you've been having chats and whatnot. We really appreciate having y'all here. But I just wanted to bring up, I saw this comment from someone. I thought, typical, from Kiwi Rob. And where is it?
Oh, there's a Kiwi Rob
and
a Kiwi Burb.
Why are all y'all so into the Kiwi? Why aren't like Pākehā Rob, cool. Pākehā Kiwi? Anyway, so he says, Kiwi Rob says, I notice lefties like Aotearoa Liberation League have forgot about Ukraine. What would you say about this? I saw someone's comment, I highlighted it. It was a perfect response, but what would you say?
I would say that I have not forgotten about Ukraine, that my heart breaks for Ukrainian people every single day. It also breaks for the Russian people, both of whom are being drawn into this proxy war by the leaders of the United States and of Russia. And by the way, Ukraine has faced horrific casualties and we don't talk about it enough. So, points granted there. We don't talk about it enough.
No, but
think what we've had over 500,000 people. 500,000 Ukrainian people losing their lives. And their government has a big part to play in that, by the way.
Oh,
the
absolutely.
Ukrainian government, you should see videos of them hunting down the Ukrainian youth and forcing them to go into the front lines, to sacrifice their lives for a war that the United States started. Because let's be clear about this. This is a war between the United States and Russia. The United States refusing to negotiate with Russia, of surrounding Russia with military bases, of angling to have Ukraine join NATO, things that US officials themselves since the 90s have been saying this could spark war. If we keep going and antagonizing Russia in this way, they could spark war. And yes, the Russian invasion is illegal and abhorrent. I will always disagree with war. As a child of war, I will always disagree with war. War is horrific. War is the most violent, horrific thing that you could possibly imagine. But at the same time, we can't ignore that it's the United States that angled for that proxy war.
Killed it.
That pushed for that proxy war, and that all the current narratives that operate around Ukraine right now play along with that US narratives. And I'll just add one more point before you go, Pere, which is that one thing that's also not being talked about is this mineral deal that the United States is striking with the Ukraine. So not only has the United States pushed Ukraine into a proxy war with Russia, made them waste hundreds of thousands of lives for, by the way, a negotiation that Russia offered them even before the war started. These are things that they could have agreed to before the war started. But they didn't agree. Now they've lost Crimea, they've lost a whole bunch of Ukraine, and Russia's not even going to give it back. Then on top of that, the US has struck a mineral deal with the Ukraine where they're going to take the majority of their minerals. Modern day colonization, absolutely abhorrent. That's what we should be talking about. How Ukraine pushed them into a war to sacrifice their people's lives, destroy their country. Now they're forcing them to agree to Russia taking those territories that they've occupied. And on top of that, the US gets to keep their minerals. So I cannot understate how effed over Ukraine has been. And it breaks my heart every day because they did a similar thing to Iraq, by the way. After they destroyed Iraq, the United States corporations like BlackRock quickly came in to buy all that public infrastructure and to rebuild and to profit off it. And they're doing the exact same thing over Ukraine. And you can look all this up. This is all publicly discussed about BlackRock celebrating effectively all the profit they can make of the destruction of Ukraine. And so, yes, you're right. We could be talking more about Ukraine and how absolutely stuffed over they have been by the United States and Russia. That's what I have to say about that.
Kia ora. Potent Perspective brings up that the Ukraine has their Nazi history as well. Not just a Nazi history. You know, they have actual Nazis that the USA has armed. And so
like the Azov battalion.
It's not just a historical connection with Ukraine and that ideology. But also I just thought that this was a great response from Corsa. Here it is. Corsa says, Kiwi Rob, I don't think anyone forgot. It's just that the media will only focus on Ukraine because the skin color of the population is more aesthetically pleasing than the population of Gaza. White supremacy, eh? And, you know, it's just funny for someone to come in here and to say, like, oh, the left should be talking about da-da-da, you know, trying to define what the left should be talking about. I don't know if this guy considers himself to be, Rob, sorry, I don't know if you consider yourself to be a member of the left, but I find it interesting that people outside of the left try to dictate to us what we should be talking about. Yes. Because as Corsa has pointed out, you know, the media, listen to the tone of the stories when it comes to a Ukrainian story. When there's a strike against Ukraine, you know where the strike has come from. They won't be ambiguous at all. They will say that it has come from Russia, and they will talk about the people who have died. They will personalize them. They'll soften their voices in the way that they talk, and they will play some nice somber music so that you can connect with the person through the screen.
It's really different.
And so a big thing for us is to share stories that are pushed to the side by the mainstream media. And why does the mainstream media push Gaza and Palestine to the side? Because we align with the big Western powers. Yeah. It's as simple as that. So victims who don't have their story in the media, who are pushed aside, are always going to take priority in terms of the stories that we report on. But I completely tautoko everything that you said. All victims of war, anyone who's suffering from war.
Russians too.
It's terrible. It's terrible. But again, like you say, the fact that America angled for this position and that America is the big winner in this whole kaupapa, that's something that I don't hear y'all in the center or on the right talk about enough in terms of Ukraine. So, hey, that one's for you to take back to your people, Rob, wherever they are. But thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Oh, you want to go all night long? Okay, go on.
Peter's ready to go. He is, eh? Someone says Noam Chomsky said the West will fight to Russia till the last Ukrainian standard. American officials, American politicians said this. I can bring this up in the next episode. A number of American politicians said we'll fight Russia until the last Ukrainian. Not a Ukrainian. Get how perverse that is. American politicians saying we will fight until the last Ukrainian standing. It gets worse. It gets worse. A few months ago, maybe half a year ago or so now, maybe longer, American politicians were pushing Ukraine to lower their age of prescription. They wanted people younger. They wanted 18-year-olds to be forced on the front lines to kill themselves for the American grinder. And, you know, they benefit in a lot of ways. One of the ways that, you know, a lot of people talk about is the backlog of weapons that they were able to get rid of during the Ukraine war. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that for them. It's just a business game, right? They have all these companies that produce all these weapons. They rely on producing these weapons, so they have to get used. I mean, it's just a matter of logic.
The weapons, many of these weapons have a shelf life. They have an expiration date. So what do you got to do? You got to cause drama in the world and push countries to the brink of feeling like they need to defend themselves so that you can then sell off those weapons so that you can make more. And, you know, of course, America is angling for war with China, and they are a very high-tech nation. So you can't be fighting this new high-tech war with old-school, low-tech weaponry. Got to get rid of it so that you can make more, so you can start new, more high-tech wars.
Absolutely. And just, you know, as a kind of unstated but obvious note of why we talk about Gaza and not Ukraine, right? Our government is supporting Ukraine.
True.
They're putting millions of dollars to Ukraine. They even sent New Zealand personnel to help train Ukrainian people.
So we're here for the underdogs.
We're here to hold our government to account. That's what we exist to do. We're here to hold the New Zealand government to account, which not only doesn't support the Gazan people, they actually support Israel. They actually support the United States. They actually helped to bomb Yemen, who was trying to defend Gaza through their blockade of the Red Sea. So the New Zealand government is actively supporting genocide. That's why we're going on about it. Whereas the New Zealand government supports Ukraine. Even though we don't think that they should be spending money on that or sending personnel there. But regardless, our government already has a stance on that. We don't have to advocate for them to support the Ukrainian people. That's the mainstream position. And our place here is to talk about the people who are being colonized, who are being dismissed, demonized, and dehumanized by the mainstream. Kapai, I think I will allow you to close now.
Okay. Well, again, and to Rob as well, to everyone, we're going to have a mean feed after this. Kia ora koutou, pō Māori e, kia pai te pō. Have a good night, and thanks again for joining us. Oh my God. What have you got? Come on.
Oh, no, but I forgot. Kai Matara said that the Christchurch shooter had a connection with the Azov battalion and even did a trip to Israel before he did the shooting. So stuff for me to check out for sure. But if so, that's some juicy stuff.
That's some dark stuff, man. That is some dark stuff.
And I trust Kai Matara.
Kai Matara is a G.
Amazing research.
You're clicking the wrong thing over there.
I keep trying to highlight your comments.
It's my one.
Kai Matara, but
I have the all-powerful clicker. Okay, thank you,
all right,
everyone.
bye.
Have a good night. Thank you so much for coming. Do hit that like button if you haven't already hit the like button. Feel free to send us feedback, any kind of feedback. If you thought we went over the top or whatever. We love getting feedback, and it does help us to grow and progress. And if you want to, you can give us a donation at kofi.com/all. Any type of donation, we appreciate all of it. If you sign up for a monthly donation, it helps us to plan into the future. But hey, anything people can offer, we really, really appreciate it. And we'll use every last cent to grow this kaupapa and to feed ourselves as well. But we really want to grow this kaupapa. If you want to help us along that journey, no mai hara mai, we really appreciate the manakitanga. Pō Māori e hoa mā. Thanks for everything. Have a good night.
Week,
and
everyone.
Shame Jones, shame on you.
Ka kite. Good night, everyone.
Mauri ora.
Much love.
No.